right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, September 16th, 2019 meeting of the Evanston City Council. I am sitting in for Mayor Haggerty this evening. He is representing the city of Evanston at a meeting of the National League of Cities. Evanston is one of 8 cities that's being recognized for its leadership in community resilience. And specifically, Evanston is being recognized for developing a bilingual educational activity called Experience Climate Change, which engages citizens in thinking about what climate impacts look and feel like locally and what actions we might take both as a city and individually to adapt to these various climate impacts. So with this recognition, Evanston's receiving a $10,000 grant to expand this educational activity and include some additional environmental topics and also adapt it so it can be used by any organization without a city staff member being there to kind of run through it. So anyway, that's another recognition of Evanston's record in sustainability. And continuing that theme, we have a special guest this evening, Aldrich Martinez-Olson from Evanston High School, who is here just to tell us briefly about a really important global climate event happening later this week. Aldrich.
All right, hello everyone. So this Friday, there will be a global climate strike. So around 2:58, students will march out of school and walk to Fountain Square on Church, where there will be a rally. All community members are invited to this rally as we want to emphasize that climate change is an intergenerational issue. There will be students, community members, and officials such as Robin Gable speaking. There will also be climate-related art projects, music, and voter registration. It'll last about an hour. So climate change, the big focus of the event will be climate justice and environmental racism. And some of our demands are to make an equitable transition to 100% clean and renewable energy, pass the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and commit to the Climate Action and Resilience Plan. And some of our messages are to for Evanston to lead the way into climate justice, that we have 11 years before the point of no return, and that people who suffer the consequences are not people who are causing the problem. Yeah, that's about it.
Great. Thank you very much, Aldrich. Really appreciate Evanston High School students taking the lead and organizing this event to mark this global climate strike happening just 3 days before the United Nations convenes for another climate summit. And City Clerk reminded me I forgot to take the roll.
Alderman Nguyen? Alderman Wilson? Here. Alderman Ruth Simmons, Alderman Suffredin, Alderman Alderman Revelle, Alderman Rainey, Alderman Fleming, yeah. Alderman Fisk, Alderman Braithwaite. Yeah.
Great.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And then just one other announcement. It is going to be Hispanic Heritage Month. It's going to be from September 15th to October 15th. We have that every year at this time to recognize and celebrate the many contributions, diverse cultures, and extensive histories of the American Latino community. It began in 1968 with just a one-week heritage celebration, but in 1988 it was expanded to be a full Heritage Month. So we encourage everyone in the community to help celebrate the American Latino heritage in our community. All right, and now comes City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I have a brief update to give on the Rubber Crown project. So many of you know we're gearing up to open the center in less than 4 months. We have incurred several weather-related delays due to the extreme cold temperatures in the winter and the massive amounts of rain we received in the spring. So we're a few weeks off of our projected opening, of which we're just going to be December. So right now we're looking at the ice operations of the building opening on January 6th, and then the remainder of the building opening on January 27th. We're constructing the building in sort of 2 sections. So the ice facility was a pre-engineered building, and then the remainder of the facility is, built on site with steel erection and everything like that. So the steel was not able to be welded in all these cold temperatures, and so we were experiencing some delays on that portion of the building. But the ice rink is on track, and that is going to open first. We do have schedules already set for both of those rinks being in use, so that's why we're going to have a phased approach to opening the whole facility. So there's demands on the ice time for us to be able to open that, and that should be ready in plenty of time for this January 6th opening date. We're going to start actually practice making ice in early December, so that will be ready to go when this happens. And then we're still on target for the demolition of the existing facility in spring, and then opening the fields in July and closing out the project. Just one last slide. This is an overview of what's coming to the council over the course of the next few months related to the project. We've got 2 user agreements coming next week that will be approved. Potentially, those have been on the website for over a month now, so community members could review them and provide feedback on them. And coming in October, we have a change order to the contract. This is a no-cost change order. The cost of the project is still the same as it has been, but this will be a change order for a time extension on the construction in order to extend the date of opening the building into January. We have another furniture, fixtures, and equipment purchase coming October 14th. It's a lot of purchases for this building: furniture, computer equipment, lighting, bookshelves, you name it. So that'll be the first purchase for that will be October 14th, and then we'll come back with a second round of purchases in November, and then another round of user agreements for review and approval on, hopefully, we're targeting November 11th, but right now that's tentative for the remainder of the agreements: North Shore Health, Evanston Soccer, and Northwestern University. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. Otherwise, that concludes my announcements.
Okay. Everybody okay? All right. Thank you, City Manager. City Clerk, do you have announcements?
No communications.
Okay. Communication.
Oh, I'm sorry. I do want to acknowledge that the clerk's office has received a number of communications relating to SP3, and those will be distributed to the members of the council.
Okay. So we're ready for public comment?
Yes. Would you like me to read off the list?
What?
I can read off this. We have 20 folks on the list.
20, okay. So, 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we're ready for public comment, and do you have the names?
The list, yeah.
Okay.
If you'd like me to either email it to you, or I can just read the list.
This is not working.
I can read the list.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, why don't you do that? So we have about 20 people signed up, so we'll give everyone 2 minutes, and I'll call everybody up in groups of 3, so you can all be ready to give your comments. And as soon as we get our little list.
Would you like me to read the first 3?
Yeah, please.
First 3 names are Mike Vasilko, Harris Miller, and Larry Donahue.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Mike Vasilko, 2728 Reese. In light of the city manager's departure soon, I'd urge the council to consider changing the type of government structure that we have to a full-time mayor who is accountable to the citizens, and discontinue the city manager form of government because he's not accountable to the citizens, and that's pretty obvious. On SP1, Evanston Development Cooperative, it's my understanding they're a for-profit corporation. 80% AMI is hardly an affordable housing matrix. A 20-year, $220,000 loan at 1% interest is not appropriate use of affordable housing funds. The property owner and the developer will profit from this agreement, while no one who is really in need of affordable housing will benefit from this property. This is a misuse of diminishing affordable housing funds. SP5, I don't understand why we need an RFP for space planning of the Civic Center. We claim to have so many in-house experts, many of whom are paid 6 figures or more. I have a hard time believing none of them know how to do space planning. Why are we paying so many staff members 6 figures if we still have to hire consultants to do the work? And lastly, and maybe most importantly, the Plan Commission procedures and guidelines need to be completely revisited, or the council should revisit whether or not the Plan Commission is really needed at all. Last week's record-breaking, nearly 7-hour-long discussion about Northwestern included professional-grade presentations by the Northwestern neighbors, experts who invested hundreds of hours preparing factual arguments against and-use zoning change. This compared to no presentation by Northwestern and no facts. Citizens enlightened Northwestern on the facts, yet after nearly 7 hours of conversation, all Northwestern had to say was trust us.
Okay,
That's what the Plan Commission based their approval on.
Please wrap up, Mr. Vasilko.
I will. That's what Northwestern based that's what the Plan Commission based their approval on. Trust us.
So I think,
No one can rationally conclude that there was anything other than a political motivation behind the Plan Commissioner's decision.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Harris Miller? Still here? What? He's not here, okay. Then Larry Donahue.
Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Donahue. I'm the chair of the city's Housing and Homelessness Commission, and I'm here to give my strong support for an initiative on your agenda tonight, item SP1 in your packet. Briefly, this proposal is to approve a loan to the Evanston Development Co-op for a pilot project to build a coach house behind a home on Sherman near Greenleaf. The maximum loan amount will be $220,000. The funds will come from the Affordable Housing Fund. The EDC has met with the Housing and Homelessness Commission twice recently. Co-founder Dick Coe met with us in August to provide background on his organization and to provide a considerable amount of information about the EDC's vision, research capabilities, and this new opportunity. Their vision is to increase the number of affordable units in Evanston and in all wards of our city. Their research has determined there is huge potential here. About 1,600 to 1,700 single-family homes have a large enough lot that current zoning will allow building a 2-bedroom house, coach house, and that includes 1 additional parking space. And these opportunities are spread throughout all wards here. EDC will be the general contractor. All workers are Evanston residents. All EDC owners are Evanston residents. Workers make up the majority of the board seats. All the materials and the work they perform are up to high standards of energy efficiency and environmental sustainability. We had a lengthy discussion at the August meeting and expressed strong support for the EDC and its ambitious plans. But to get the ball rolling, the EDC needs to get the first coach house built. They need a pilot. So Dick returned to the commission a week and a half ago to present his pilot proposal, which you have before you. The commission reviewed his plan and discussed it, and we approved it unanimously and enthusiastically. Here's what's important about this initiative.
So Larry,
First,
can you wrap up? Your time's up.
the commission.
Super fast.
Okay. This organization has identified a significant opportunity to increase affordable housing in Evanston. Second, the opportunities they've identified are spread throughout our city. There's an important equity and diversity benefit to the strategy. Third, having a pilot is important in moving their strategy forward. Having a model, something built, something physical and occupied that other interested parties can see is critical in attracting financial support. Fourth, it's an excellent opportunity for a public-private partnership. EDC has the vision, the strategy, the capabilities, the values, and now a pilot proposal. They need funding to get the first coach house built.
Okay, so thank you, Larry.
Thank you all.
Okay. Next, we have Alex Cohen and Ken Prosky and Anita Jewers.
Good evening, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to address the council. My name is Alex. I'm a future resident of Evanston, currently under contract on a home at the corner of Central and Prairie. And as it relates to this meeting tonight, I'm currently in the due diligence phase of starting my own cannabis business, and I'm considering establishing part of my business here in Evanston. I'm here tonight because I strongly believe that cannabis businesses and the tax revenue that would bring to the city would be highly beneficial for both the city and its residents. I'm here tonight to kindly request the following. I would love for the City Council to look into easing the distancing requirements for cannabis businesses, as a more relaxed distancing requirement would open up additional locations in Evanston for these businesses to establish here, and would ultimately result in more tax revenue for the city and more benefits for the residents who rely on these funds. I would like the City Council to permit on-premises consumption and or social use spaces, very similar to a hookah bar for cannabis consumers. Cannabis is equally as social of an activity for its residents as grabbing a drink at the bar with your friends, and having a safe and legal place for Evanston residents to be able to enjoy their cannabis will make it so that these residents are not enjoying their cannabis in places that they should not be enjoying this recreational drug, and also medicinal. And lastly, I would like to know what the City of Evanston is currently planning on doing to helping its residents whose minor cannabis convictions have been expunged, to help these folks get back on their feet and rebuild their lives. That's all I have. Thank you so much for your time and opportunity.
Thank you. Ken? And we have his.
Before I begin my comments officially, I'd like to know if you each have a copy of my handout.
Okay.
Do you want to give the header?
Did you get that out?
Did we get
Okay.
that one?
This is the one for me.
Do you want to give the header?
The header is called Key Points Regarding Rebuttal of U2 Zoning Amendment. Okay. And then after I'm finished, Mr. Reed is going to pass out the Plan Commission presentation that I made a few nights ago. It's just too long to go over tonight, but I want to make sure I get it in your hands.
Okay.
So what I'm going to basically do now in my 2 minutes is try to summarize some key points, and if I don't finish, I'll finish it next week. That's in your handout. Number one, the U2 Athletic District is literally an island in the middle of a saturated residential neighborhood. There's 520 single-family homes within 1,000 feet. And of the 315 of these that are in Evanston, we have 342 residents in this area that have signed a petition to oppose the amendment. Number two bullet is that we did a comparison to Big Ten universities, just like the city staff tried to do. And you'll see some maps in the longer presentation that shows, compared to other Big Ten universities, Northwestern is an anomaly, basically, in terms of residential neighborhoods, access roads, and parking. There are only 2 other schools that have any residences within 1,000 feet of their arenas, only 2. Northwestern has literally 520, which is 5 times as many as all the other universities in the Big Ten combined. So, and the other Big Ten universities also have multiple 4-lane access roads or expressways for their parking and arenas, and nobody needs to drive through a residential area. Number 3, the off-street parking at other Big Ten universities is literally twice what Welsh Ryan has available. And compared to other sports arena zoning codes around the country, it's similar. The key thing to look at is how many parking spots per arena seat are there. Northwestern has 5.2. Other Big Ten universities have double that, 2.6. And the standard code that I see most often is 3. So what that means is there's a big deficiency in parking. Number 4 bullet is that when you add up all of this in a best case versus worst case scenario for Welsh Ryan in terms of parking, the best case is there's 987 to 1,348 deficit parking spaces. The worst, that's the worst case. The best case is assuming that 80% of these people actually drive and 20% take public transportation. And even then, there's 500 to 800 deficit of parking spaces. Where do these people go? So let's flip over to bullet number 5 on the back. The Plan Commission did modify the text amendment language to say that they wanted to require 2,000 free parking spaces. And so what this means is of the 1,359 available at Northwestern, east and west lots, there'd have to be an additional 641 on-campus places to park. And my point is, it's highly doubtful that people, when the lot is going to be saturated at 3,500 roughly people attending an event, where are the other 3,000 to 3,500 going to park? Are they going to actually drive a mile and a half away to a university lot? Or are they going to park for free in the neighborhood, which is what they do now? I mean, the parking is ridiculous. It's insane. Bullet number 6, under the proposed zoning amendment, the number of U2 district events, this was a key point at the Plan Commission. With 3,500 spectators where the lots get saturated, it's actually going to increase by 59%. Northwestern is claiming that they do have 35 events under the permitted amount now. They're claiming that they're reducing the 35 to 13, when in fact, when you look at the number of events that have 3,500 people, can I just finish number 6 and then I'll stop? When you look at the number of participants that have the number of events that have 3,500 people, there aren't 35. Northwestern only has 1 or 2, and they typically only have 1,000 to 2,000 people at these events. None of them have 3,500. So what we're talking about is an increase from 22 basketball games and graduations up to 35 events when you count in the professional athletic events. That's a 59% increase.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
And please take a look at this on your own.
Right.
Devin's going to pass them out at this point.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Anita Jewers, then we're Mark Rosati, and Mary Rosinski.
Good evening. Members of City Council, you should have a packet of photographs, I believe, which were made for, okay, thank you, to illustrate my comments. So members of City Council and neighbors. As you consider approval of recreational marijuana dispensaries, I would like to share a cautionary tale. My son and his family live 2 blocks from the New England Treatment Access Dispensary, or NETA, which set up shop in the former Brookline Bank on Boylston and Washington Streets in the Brookline suburb of Boston. Like Evanston's business districts, this is a location which is close to public transit, multiple schools and child care facilities, surrounded by stores, businesses, offices, hotels, and restaurants, houses of worships, and the public library, and is within a block or 2 of residential streets and parks. The dispensary operates 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. During those hours, the line of customers is unending, rain or shine, year-round. This is illustrated in the photographs. I took them on a recent visit, and I'm happy to share them if others would like. As you can see, the Little Children's Schoolhouse, Daycare, and Preschool is directly adjacent to the dispensary's parking lot. Again, it used to be the Brookline Bank. Now it is the staging area for the steady line of customers with multiple portable toilets and garbage cans lining the street to accommodate them. The dispensary has been operating since Massachusetts approved recreational marijuana sales last year. Enticed by the prospect of considerable tax revenue, Brookline approved the dispensary over the opposition of neighboring residents and businesses. My son and his neighbors are now experiencing the fallout of the dispensary, which has resulted in reduced on-street parking availability, illegal pot smoking on their streets, on the steps of their homes and buildings, and in customers' parked cars, public littering, loitering, and urinating, as documented in the photographs. My son's young children and those of his neighbors are now very familiar with the odor of marijuana smoke, which they inhale as they walk to and from school and the library. There were 2 recent, I'm going to finish, but I just wanted to say there were 2 recent articles, one in the Washington Examiner and another in online, pointing out that where marijuana dispensaries have opened, there is a surge in crime and highway accidents and underage use of marijuana. So for these reasons, I urge City Council to have the caution and courage to please deny approval for the sale of recreational marijuana in Evanston. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Rosati, and then Mary Rosinski and Evie Russell.
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Rosati. My family and I have lived in Evanston 15 years, very close to the Northwestern Athletics Complex on North Ashland. Last week, I, along with dozens of neighbors, testified to the Plan Commission against Northwestern's request to allow non-collegiate professional and commercial events at Welsh Ryan. The Plan Commission heard that more than 800 people have signed a petition against Northwestern's proposal. It heard from parents of young children very concerned about safety. It heard from citizens warning this proposal would damage infrastructure, cause traffic congestion, and lead to a decline in property tax revenues. But the Plan Commission still voted 4-2 to advance Northwestern's proposal to this council. All of us who moved into this neighborhood understood that we'd be living near an athletics complex that would host university sports and events such as graduations. That was part of the deal. However, changing the law to allow professional and commercial events is a completely different matter. This, in my opinion, will create significant stresses on our community. Northwestern is a very wealthy institution and Evanston's largest landowner. As a not-for-profit, it pays no property taxes. There is absolutely no need for the university to host professional and commercial events. This is a congested residential neighborhood unequipped to handle these kinds of events. Does Northwestern plan to start paying property taxes on Welsh Ryan to offset the cost to the city of turning North Evanston into Wrigleyville? Will it commit to hire dozens of off-duty police to secure this residential neighborhood if it starts hosting mixed martial arts, boxing, monster truck rallies, and rock concerts at Welsh Ryan? I have heard nothing to this effect, only vague statements about entertainment tax revenues. I'm convinced that every dime the city makes from Northwestern's plan will wind up costing us $1. I urge the council to reject Northwestern's request when it comes up for a vote. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So Mary Rosinski, or Mary here, or Evie?
Can I excuse Mary Rosinski? She had I think an emergency.
Oh, okay.
Could you sort of postpone her?
Sure,
in case
sure,
she shows up?
right.
She's also, I've deposited some material.
Right,
She was
we've been-
supposed to deposit 5 more copies, 8 more copies of one piece of material, which I only have 4.
Okay.
So,
Okay, go ahead.
okay. I'm Evie Russell. The U.S. banned DDT not because of its industry's descriptions, just words on paper, but because DDT actual effects in the past, at the time, and projected uses in the future. Fact versus fiction. Use the same logic now. How many annual temporary events over 2,000 actually took place at the arena and stadium over the last decade? 0, nada, zilch, nothing. And you wants 13 more days of events at 7,000 people each. 13 days versus 0 days. Ignore current ordinance numbers that only exist on paper. NU has not hosted any temporary event above 2,000 over 10 years or more because they cannot profit on temporary events under the current ordinance. Why not include the current 2 small temporary events among the 13? Because a picnic movie night can return to the Lake Campus where it used to be held regularly. Same goes for the Tiny K Marathon. And you will want to monetize all 13 proposed events. 13 versus 0. 13 more days at 7,000 absolutely affects a predominantly residential neighborhood. U2 events impact us now, basketball included. Take just one issue, noise. Noise won't end at 10:30 p.m. and 11:30 on Fridays and Saturdays. Event breakdown takes longer than 30 minutes. 6,000 to 7,000 people take time to reach the exit, board cars, or noisily idling buses, or walk to trains and finally leave the neighborhood. Noise will go on until the wee hours of the night. Say no to the proposed amendment, say no to PRO. One more. The Chamber claims that visitors to Evanston spend $30 on average during events. Yes, city events, popular events that are free or cheap and offer food and crafts. They attract people to shop there, not a new events. For example, I doubt any shopping derived from the 1970s Beach Boys concert, which, however, created major havoc in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Jackson Powler, then John Kennedy, and Mary Kim.
Jackson Powler, First Ward. So I'm very happy to see that the city is moving on affordable housing, the SP1, a pilot project for ADUs for affordable housing purposes is a good place to start, but I want us to make sure that that is our floor rather than our ceiling. Evanston is a diverse city. It's going to require a variety of different solutions to address an issue like affordable housing. But if we do that, we have to do it right. And using the most recent Illinois Housing Development Authority schedule of maximum rents for a 0-bedroom for 80% AMI still comes up to a total rent cost of roughly $13,000 a year. So to meet the definition of affordable, spending no more than 30% of the household income on housing costs, the tenants would have to make roughly $44,000 a year. 28% of Evanston is housing burdened, and over 50% of that group make below $39,000 a year. And that there are only over 5,000 households in that category. If using that percentage of AMI becomes our barometer, none of them would really be in any significant way helped. Again, for what the SP1 is meant to accomplish, it is a great start, but moving forward, we have to make sure we continue to think bigger. The next budget will have to be finalized by the end of the year, so if the city is going to make any more moves on this for this next fiscal year, it's going to have to happen fairly quickly. We need more projects, more affordable, like 50% AMI. My point is, as we're moving forward, working on making Evanston more affordable, let's not forget to make Evanston more affordable for everybody.
Thank you. John Kennedy.
Good evening, Council. John Kennedy. I'm in Melissa's ward. It feels like deja vu up here again. For those of you that might remember, I was involved 15 years ago on saving this very building, and I'm here to speak to SP 5. It seems like instead of a lot of consideration back 15 years ago, the council wants to move, the staff wants to move at light speed. For example, back then there was a special Civic Center committee set up to look at all the alternatives, price things out, ask good questions, receive comments from citizens. Nothing there today. They want to go right to studies on where they can move. There's no consideration of the preservation side or previous studies. Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill in 2007 completed a study on space demands, just like you're being proposed to tonight. Their finding, not 12 years ago, was that you have adequate space in this building. There's been no review of specifics. For example, back 12 years ago or 15 years ago, the maintenance department was complaining that they couldn't replace the heating and air conditioning cooling units, that they had to be custom made, absorbing a lot of the budget. A simple Google found not only spare parts to those units, but complete replacements for $2,000 a piece. So, there has to be some specific questions asked from that. At least that example shows that not everything on paper is what you might want to believe. Another point, landmark status. This building's a landmark. That means you can take the credit for improving the building, 20%, and sell it, mitigating some of the issue. What I'd like to do is remind the council that we had a referendum, another one, back 15 years ago. Again, 80% of the people said stay. What I would suggest is you wait till a new manager gets here, reconsider this thing, get the public documents that are buried in the maintenance group department, get them public, and let this community look again at this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mary Kim?
Good evening. I just want to confirm I have 2 minutes.
Yes, please.
I'll set my timer. I could be rather verbose, so I want to make sure. So, good evening. I want to introduce myself. I am Captain Mary Kim with the Salvation Army, Evanston Corps. And usually on a Sunday morning when I'm standing behind the pulpit preaching, most of the people are in front of me and not behind me. So this is rather odd. So Chief Cook, if I have runs in my pantyhose, don't share that information. I am here just to introduce myself to you as the new pastor of the Salvation Army at 1403 Sherman Avenue. I believe it is Alderman Wilson's ward. And it is a privilege for me to come back to Evanston. And as soon as I walked in this evening, I saw this beautiful lighthouse, Evanston 1863. And I had to do, I'm Asian, I do not do mental math, so I used my iPhone. And the Evanston is 156 years old. Somebody can check that. And for the first 27 years of Evanston's existence, there was no Salvation Army in Evanston, because the Salvation Army in Evanston started on December 23 of 1890. So for 129 years, the Salvation Army and Evanston have been partners to help our city, wonderful here in Evanston. Next year will be, if you do the math, 130 years of the Salvation Army right here in Evanston, partnering with all of you. Just a side note, I was a teacher at Kingsley Elementary School, and I believe it was the 7th Ward, right there on McCormick and Green Bay, for 7 years, 1998 to 2004. I taught 1st grade and 3rd grade, right across from Haven Middle School. So to be back home after 15 years is a privilege and honor. So once again, nice to meet you. You'll hear a lot from me in the future. Thank you.
Well, welcome back, yes. Next is Patrick Duncan, also Christina Brandt, and Sue Lowellbach.
Hi, my name is Patrick Duncan, and I'm a resident of Evanston's 5th Ward. I live at Church and Dodge, and we just bought our house. It's a 2-flat in March, and it was a 1-bedroom apartment, which we were, when I put it out advertisement, I was amazed at how many people had a hard time coming up with $800 to rent a small apartment. My wife, we currently have space in our backyard and that we don't need to use, and after reading about the Evanston Development Cooperative in Evanston now, my wife reached out to EDC about how we could build a coach house and offer affordable housing. We would love to see this project at 118 Sherman Avenue, the pilot project for an affordable coach house, move forward so that more homeowners can access opportunities to build affordable coach houses in Evanston. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Christina Brandt.
Good evening, members of City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. My name is Christina Brandt. I reside at 2714 Woodbine Avenue. I am a mother of school-age children. I am a nurse. I am someone who has lived in multiple Big Ten cities, namely Ann Arbor, Madison, Iowa City, and now Evanston. By far the most contentious relationship I have observed is that between the City of Evanston and Northwestern University. I am here tonight to offer public comment on the proposed NU text amendment for zoning. I became aware of the amendment through neighborhood emails announcing the NU-sponsored neighbor meeting. Significant to my attendance at this meeting was a comment made to me at the end by an NU employee saying if the neighbors have a problem with it, they should just move. It was brazen, it was insensitive, my concern was elevated, I became involved. The threshold for a zoning change amendment should be immense and require the highest scrutiny. The process thus far has not lived up to that expectation. I attended both Planning Commission meetings on the subject. While I understand the Planning Commission is made up of volunteers and some city staff, the review and process was inadequate, inconsistent, and at times disrespectful. It was very clear that the Planning Commission had not read the submitted materials. We're unfamiliar with city processes, such as tax amounts gained on different types of venues in terms of athletic versus entertainment. They were not certain on if and how to determine if a standard had been met. They dismissed the neighbors' well-prepared presentations, all of this while NU had zero traffic, safety, or economic impact studies. There was at one point a disrespectful comment made by one of the commission members saying our houses were likely overvalued about 5%, so a loss of 5% is not a big deal. In summary, this is a poor reflection on our city and its processes. Furthermore, it doesn't sit well when our city officials are then hosted to lunch and the game this past Saturday. It would seem that would be a conflict of interest. Your residents need you and need you to put their needs and concerns ahead of Northwestern University. This includes holding the threshold for zoning change to the highest scrutiny.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Sue Lowellbach. Then it's going to be Irv Chokol and Ray Friedman.
Good evening. I'm Sue Lowbach from Connections for the Homeless. I'd like to speak in support of the Evanston Development Cooperative ADU pilot proposal. I think there's lots of good reasons to support this. I have not heard of any reasons not to. I'd like to highlight 4 reasons in particular. One is that a pilot affordable ADU is a really good idea. We need a few of these under our belt in order to really be able to sort of propagate these throughout the city in the most efficient and effective way. This can be a learning experience and really provide credibility for future efforts. 2, a pilot is a really good thing, a good effort for the city to support. The city's support will help to gain support from other sectors, homeowners, financial investors, and businesses. 3, a pilot can help attract funding and financing to Evanston. I know the city participated in Housing Action Illinois' Community Revitalization Challenge, where they were trying to engage banks in helping nonprofits and municipalities with housing issues. Connections also applied for one of those grants, and we know that banks are sort of having a hard time figuring out how to participate in some of these, and this pilot will actually show them how to do it. So this is really, I think, a good demonstration. And then 4, we've gone through all these discussions about inclusionary zoning, and I've come to believe that inclusionary zoning is sort of a gateway drug for further discussions on affordable housing. What I'm hoping is that this work on coach houses, which granted will mostly serve people at 80% of the AMI and above, well, I'd love to see us building housing for people with no income. However, maybe this coach house kind of project can be sort of a gateway drug to get into additional, deeper kinds of subsidies by looking at interesting partnerships with other kinds of lenders and so on. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Irv Chokol.
Good evening. My name is Irv Chokol. I'm in the 9th Ward. When I found out that the sale of marijuana for recreational use was approved in the city of Evanston, I was surprised and disappointed. It makes me wonder if you know the detrimental effects of marijuana use. There are studies that have shown anyone under age 25 using marijuana can have permanent damage done to their brains because they're not fully developed until age 25. Do you know there are also studies that show daily use of marijuana can also cause permanent damage to your brain to people of any age. Do you know that in Colorado and other states that have approved the legal sale of marijuana, that accidents have increased significantly? The funds we will derive from the sale are not worth the risk to the well-being and injury and possible death of recreational use of marijuana. I hope that none of you, your families, or no one experience any of these possibilities. I urge you to review the information that's available. We have until September 30th to opt out, as other cities and towns have done. Please take this into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Ray Friedman, then Albert Gibbs, and Doreen Price.
Sorry. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'd like to talk about one of my favorite subjects, money. I know we have 3 roundtable discussions on a new budget. I'm still very concerned over last year's budget discussions. It seems we still need answers to 3 main questions. Where's the money coming from? Where's the money going? And how much will this cost the residents? Not just next year, but in 5 years and in 10 years. Last year, you raised the debt limit by $37 million to $150 million. And this year raised it another $10 million to $160 million. And last year, we had a budget deficit of $7.5 million and proposed to close 1 fire station, cut health care programs, amongst others. And yet, you have approved so far $54 million for Robert Crown, spent $8 million on James Park lawsuit that you were advised to drop years ago, $7 to $8 million on Fountain Square, purchased dozens of new vehicles last year and again this year, also spending all kinds of money on study after study, and almost forgot giving away millions of dollars to businesses who may be asking for it. And so my last question is, why? If this were your money, is this how you would be spending it? We need to get a handle on this budget process and spending. This is our money, not a Monopoly game. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Albert Gibbs and Doreen Price, and then Madeline Decree. When I sort of mentioned that you're next in line, if you could get ready to get to the microphone.
Good evening, Albert Gibbs, 5th Ward. Just want to speak briefly to a few items. The gentleman that just spoke, man, did he hit it on the button. There's this talk about loaning $220,000 for a coach house at 8%, 80%. This is not affordable. It doesn't make sense. Reminds me of something my grandparents used to say, elders used to say years ago when they first came to Evanston from Abbeville, South Carolina. They were domestics. They said those coach houses were made so we can be closer to the employer and tend to what they need. So to bring up this coach housing thing again, me reminds me of plantation housing. It's just not, it doesn't make any sense. Inclusionary Housing Committee and then subcommittees. What is that about? Ethics Committee and then subcommittee. Hire an outside attorney for Ethics or Rules Committee. What's wrong with the attorney you have? Sell City Hall? Wow. More studies, more money. New Light Streets, more studies, more money. More street studies, more money. More alley studies, more money. If Valley sells their shopping center, will they pay back the $2 million the city of Evanston gave them? that too hard of a question to ask? I think we're out of line here, Evanston City government. You seem to only help those that you find you prefer to help. You don't help the people. It's pathetic.
Thank you. Doreen Price, Madeline Decree.
I'll add to Mr. Gibbs and Mr. Jackson, and also Sue with regard to an objection to the 80% AMI. I know you're doing a pilot program, but you can surely get it lower. In fact, the advice that's been, or recommendations that have been given consistently from Housing and Hopelessness and Sue's group is below that, 60 or 50%, and have been fighting the city on that one in terms of that the 80% is okay in terms of like trying to help the middle class as well. But the greatest need right now are people who don't have homes, and having a home and staying in it is the next greatest need. Doing this competes with the people who need to do that. We do not have a priority in the Affordable Housing Fund. We need it now. This is a perfect example. If you take grant money that some people can only accept in terms of because they're poor or whatever, they can't get a loan, even if it's forgivable, or they have a reverse mortgage because they did the civic thing and didn't ask for money right away. They're in a position where the only thing they can get, the only thing that will save their homes while this $200,000 is out of the fund because it's not coming in. We don't know the rate it's coming back. It's 1%. Current rates are 3 or 4%. You can do the math. It does. It eats up what in terms of what we lose in rent, in terms of what was so-called we don't have to pay as difference as a city to help the renters. But in this particular case, if you lower it to 50% AMI, then maybe the business model isn't quite there yet. And I think we should join when the business model makes this like affordable for the very next step, instead of money that's going to be spent and we have no idea how much longer or how long people need to study the situation to say if it's doable or not. That will slow up the amount of money that people need right now. We need to prioritize. We need to separate lending money versus money that's grant. It can no longer be the first person who calls and says, I have this great idea, which everyone says is a great idea. No one denies that these are great ideas. But all the great ideas have to be prioritized based on need and urgency and other things that people factor in. Right now, it's who's first, who has the loudest voice, who's able to make a plea that you're going to save 10,000 people or whatever. I'm not saying that in a bad way, because you can really affect a lot of people by affecting one person. I do believe that. But you need to have solid proof. You need to have solid numbers. And this corporation is one of the best corporations. I support them 1,000%. But this is not the way to begin this. Thank you.
Thank you. Darlene Cannon. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Madeline Decree. I'm sorry, you are next.
Madeline here, Decree. Hello, everyone. Hi, everybody at home. I would like to thank the City of Evanston. I know you're not used to hearing that, but I mean it. The air quality sensor study is in full force in the City of Evanston, I understand. I missed the August 29th meeting at Fleetwood Jardine. There was 20 people in attendance, so I understand. Thank you, Bob Stanbar, for that information. Okay, I understand that we have lots of things going on here in the city, but we need more notification. We need more notification. Everyone doesn't look at that high-tech stuff, but we should, but we don't. This company is paid $272,000, understand. This company has a study that's going on that will show the results in December. Where are these sensors? I understand that there's 5. One is located on Simpson Street. I know that for sure. I saw him putting it up. I didn't know what the heck it was. The other one is between Church Street, Dodge and Florence. I think that's the garbage place. Okay, years ago, I spoke at a District 65 meeting to complain about the air quality in the 5th Ward with all the buses going on. No one did anything. I look forward to the data that's coming up in December. Thank you.
Thank you. Darlene Cannon, and then Carla Sutton, and then we're going to go back and pick up Harris Miller and Mary Rosinski.
Good evening. Darlene Cannon, Second Ward. It's inappropriate to use affordable housing money for a for-profit developer, and it's not even an affordable housing unit. We need units at the affordable rate of 30 to 60% AMI, and we need 3 bedrooms, not 2 bedrooms. We are willing to give $220,000 for 1 unit that will house 1 family when Connections to the Homeless is housing 10 families for $300,000 for 2 years. Where's the help for the small affordable housing landlords that provide affordable housing for residents in the city? They deserve the same sort of grants or something like that for theirs to improve their properties, just as we gave for storefront properties at Church and Dodge. So then I ask you, who are you representing? I understand it's not. I just see that you guys are making a mockery of our affordable housing plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Carla Sutton.
Good evening, Carla Sutton, 5th Ward. I stand here this evening in opposition to SB1 and SB5. My concerns for SB1 is that the ADU at 80% is much too high for affordable. I'm secondly very concerned about individuals getting grants when that money could be spread throughout the community for security deposits and for other things that would help people who are in dire need of funds now. So please do not address that this evening and pass that. Secondly, SB5. I see by the elevator and by the podium right here, you have as your #1 goal for the infrastructure and the environment in Evanston. I think you ought to live up to your commitment that you have on this board about what your priorities are. And I don't see any priority of any discussion that will endure moving or anything but fixing this building up until you get the financing straight for Robert Crown and some of the other agencies that we're doing, and start giving me a report of how much money you've already collected for reparations. Thank you.
Thank you. Harris Miller and then Mary Rosinski.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to come back up, to speak. My name is Harris Miller from the 4th Ward. Please oppose SP5. The city recently upgraded the 2 elevators in the lobby and the directories, as you can see, in the basement and in the lobby as well. How much did that cost taxpayers? Why build a new facility while the city is spending $70 million on Robert Crown? The citizens fought for this building through a ballot referendum to not build a new civic center 15 years ago, before I was a resident here. I lived in Morton Grove at the time. Was that ballot meaningless? Will the name change of the civic center? It's also not clear what is meant by repurposing. Does that mean demolishing and reusing the site for new construction, or maintaining it as a community center? Instead of possibly relocating City Hall, let's upgrade the electrical and HVAC and restore this historic building to keep all services in one place. Finally, we need a moratorium on projects, spending, and expensive studies until we have a new city manager in place who listens to all residents. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mary Rosinski.
Hi, Mary Rosinski. I agree with everything that people have been saying. We need a plan. We can't continue without it, and we put money into buildings that then we decide we don't need. So what I was going to say, first of all, tomorrow night's budget hearings. I hope people from around town will attend all of them. Dates on the website. I think we need to be thinking in terms of long-term secure financial footing and start working our way out of the $160 million debt that has been created. We can't build and tax our way out of this debt. We have to plan. We need to look at the spending. Evanston's in the process, as Harris said, of hiring a new city manager who will be assisting the council in creating long-term plans. We haven't had it. If we're thinking of selling this building, what is the big plan? Well, then what happens? I mean, the people may have an idea. There may be conversations going on, but this is huge. And I feel like if everyone's entitled to be part of that discussion. For the past few years, the councils have approved millions of dollars on projects which could have been elective, they probably were, and probably should have been postponed until we had the funds to cover and pay for them. Most residents in this town are trying to live within their means and can't afford to upgrade their home, get a better apartment, get a car, and make their plans until they have saved the money and figured out how they're going to pay for it. And we need the long-term plans and everyone to understand it, because right now it seems like we're charging residents fees, increasing taxes, payments for reckless spending, and then spending with the anticipated revenue we don't seem to maximize. I know a couple years ago we made a fortune on Northwestern permits, building permits, and we don't have that. We have to plan on what we are taking in, and the other stuff helps get us out of the debt. The higher taxes, fees, parkings are not the solution to spendings, and I encourage you also to have a moratorium. I'm also I'll leave, but I'm greatly disturbed by the arbitrary nature of the Planning Commission the other day and the way they applied their standards. It seems like St. A's had to have 100 pages of studies, impacts, all that, and Northwestern was able to show up with 4 pages, no studies, and something about parking and congestion that was non-applicable. I really hope we go back and revisit that. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you to everyone who came for public comment, and now we'll turn to whoops, here comes some more handouts, I guess. And we'll turn to the business of the council meeting. So the first item of business is consideration of the Evanston Development Cooperative ADU pilot proposal. The Housing and Homelessness Commission and staff recommend approval of a loan of up to $220,000 from the Affordable Housing Fund to an Evanston homeowner to finance the building of an accessory dwelling unit coach house by the Evanston Development Cooperative. The homeowner will rent the ADU at 80% AMI for 20 years to households from the city's centralized wait list managed by Community Partners for Affordable Housing. This pilot project will inform the development of programs to construct and finance ADUs for residents, community members, private investors, and future financial partners, with the goal of integrating additional affordable housing, particularly in single-family neighborhoods. So before I turn to my colleagues for their motion and discussion, I just have to say I'm going to be recusing myself from the discussion and the vote, as I am a shareholder in the cooperative. So to get us started, would someone like to make a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Okay. All right. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there a discussion? Alderman Wilson.
So I think the public comment kind of covered all the points, honestly, on both sides of it. The enterprise itself seems like a great idea, a great enterprise. The zoning change that we've collectively been supporting to enable people to have more housing in the community, to have alternative options, is an important part of maintaining affordability, creating an additional affordability. But as I think Ms. Cannon and others pointed out, one of the things that I am trying to focus on right now, in the absence of the luxury of funds, is I want to have the largest possible impact. And I think we are here at maybe the very next meeting after hearing the detailed information from Connections on how impactful that amount of money has been. And, I don't want to they're not apples to apples. It's something that's totally different. I think it is important to kind of get this going. But I have heard some specific expression in the community that private homeowners are interested in doing this. That private homeowners are interested in working with EDC. And what I don't want to do is put those private owners in competition with a publicly subsidized, alternative. So I'm uncomfortable doing that with the level of funding and with the tying up of that amount of funds for this period of time. So while it's a great project and I want it to continue forward, we supported the initial grant, and I continue to support the organization. I don't feel comfortable doing this loan this way.
Okay. And I didn't. So I'm sorry not to have paid attention to the lights. Who's next? Alderman Fleming's next. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Ravel, just for the record, I know that the previous pro tem will be taking over just for this discussion item. I just wanted it to be noted for the record that since you recused yourself, just for this item, we will not chair the discussion.
Okay. So, okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, I will go while they change seats.
I move that we approve Alderman Braithwaite to chair the discussion on this line item because of the recusal by Alderman Ravel.
Second.
Roll call.
Go ahead, call it.
Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Alderman vote. Yes, you vote. Alderman Ruth Simmons.
Aye.
Alderman Suffredin. Aye. Alderman Ravel.
She's recusing.
You just have to note it. Alderman Fleming.
Aye.
Alderman Fisk. And Alderman Braithwaite.
Aye. All right. So I also see two lights, Alderman Simmons followed by Alderman Fisk.
Alderman Fleming, then Alderman Ruth Simmons.
Got it.
All right, here. So I have a few concerns about this as well. Not, again, anything against the development of the accessory dwelling units. I think we actually should expand that. Mr. Gibbs, I appreciate your comments about the workers and what they used to be, but I've said plenty of times I would put an ADU in my backyard for my aging parents, not so they can serve me, but just so they're close. But my concern with this is that it's not sustainable for other residents. So we have, and I actually, unbeknownst to me, because I didn't know this was coming, I met with a resident in my ward who's willing to put one in and take a 10-year loss of her personal financial situation to provide affordable housing. And not that she is looking to be commended, but I think if we're going to look at providing private homeowners with some kind of, financial benefit or loan to make an ADU for affordable purposes, I think it needs to be something that we can offer to all residents. I'm not really sure, aside from what the packet says, that this resident came forward with interest, how this resident was selected. I have a little bit of an issue with it not being an RFP or something that was public, put out for any resident who's interested in putting an ADU out. Also with this amount, being that we don't have such a huge pot of money for this amount is really too high. It's not sustainable. If it were something like $5,000 or something smaller that we could then replicate to other people who are willing to do that. But this is a substantial amount of money, and even though this is a pilot, if we have other residents who don't have the money but have the interest, we couldn't offer them the same thing. So I just don't know with public funds how we justify picking one person over another, no matter what their intentions are here. I really would like to again say I want us to look at expanding where we allow ADUs even more than we have now, despite the cost. There are people like myself who would put one in. I don't have an alley, but I have plenty of space in my backyard. And I think if we really want to tackle this, city financing aside, we really have to look at our zoning and really push ourselves past what we think is appropriate or comfortable or what have you, and really open it up so people can do more creative things on their larger lots of land to offer affordable housing. My other issue with this is, like Alderman Wilson said, I know we've heard from Mr. Sutton and
Ms. Payton and other people who offer affordable housing now on their own, and we really have not come up with a good way to support them to continue to do that. However, we do support developers. I know there was a comment that I don't agree with about people having skin in the game. I think anyone who's willing to take any kind of financial hit in this city has skin in the game. So I really would like us to look at using our affordable housing funds if we don't know, how long we're going to have them or how we're going to continue to increase that pot, how we can support people who are already living here, whether they're homeless, whether they're private owners who are offering affordable housing, just ways in which we know we're not catching buckets of people and how we can really be diligent about using money for that. So again, I appreciate the people who want to do this. I understand it's not cheap. I understand they're willing to offer what they think is an affordable rate, but these are public dollars, and we have to have a public process if we're going to spend them and who we're going to choose to spend them on. So I'm just not comfortable with that, with going forward with that tonight.
Thank you, Alderman Fleming. Alderman Simmons.
Thank you, and thank you to the corporation for your commitment to this. I really want to see this happen. You all know that. Sorry I hadn't been able to have any meetings before now, but I did get some additional questions answered. And much of my concerns were brought up by my neighbors and my colleagues. Some additional ones would include that just for clarification, is the owner income qualifying at low income or right? So with that said, to spend that kind of money relative to the money that we have and the need that we have for affordable housing, to generate wealth and equity for one household that is not already financially vulnerable, it's not something that I can support. And so I talked about wanting to, if we did something like this, have the owner also be income qualifying so that we can generate wealth in households that need it. So what I'm seeing based on the members that I've asked is a very generous return of 8% in, the next couple of years. And an 8% return is really exciting, but the member list doesn't include anybody who is in a low or even a moderate income here in town. So to create a for-profit model that gives a return to already affluent members for a possibly affluent owner to build wealth and equity in their home, to only subsidize a unit for a family is not, I think, what at least I have in mind for what we will do with our affordable housing funds and how we will generate wealth in community. And I know this isn't intentionally for generating wealth, but I would like to see you work harder at finding lending partners. So if there's a lot of interest in the community, there are mortgage products out there for doing additions and rehabs, and I think there's an opportunity there to work with the banks in town to let them know that there's interest in this type of development. And another thing that I'm not sure about, does this ADU include expanding habitable basements, like building out basements, or is, okay. So my point is, I think $500,000 is way too much. I think the model, being that it's a for-profit model, isn't one. We've already given $40,000 to help towards the startup of the business. So to give anything additional and to also subsidize loans for folks that don't need it, if there is a commitment from those homeowners, they can go and get a home mortgage and they can do the investment themselves and take on the burden. I did it as a very, very low to moderate income earner here in town. I went and got a mortgage, and I personally provide 3 units of affordable housing. And so I'm committed to it. I think that other residents can do the same. And for us to spend our tax dollars in doing it is not something that I could support at that amount. So if you want to consider maybe understanding that you need to have a pilot or a model to show people, like, this is what it looks like. If there is some way we can maybe subsidize a model so that you have that as a reference, I would be open to that. But 500,000 is not something that I can support.
Thank you, Alderman Simmons. Alderman Fisk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to my colleagues on the council for their comments. I absolutely agree with everything that everyone has said. I think it's important that we use the limited amount of money that we have in the Affordable Housing Fund to help as many people as possible. And I understand the example of this pilot project. I'm a little bit uncomfortable that with the suggestion that maybe the city needs to be the to put money toward it before we can convince a bank or other lender to be involved. That was mentioned by someone at citizen comment. I think this is something where, as Alderman Rusiman said, we really need to go out and find alternate sources of money. We're very good at spending money up here on the council, but we also need to be very careful of protecting those funds that we have that are designed to help people. And so I'm not going to support this tonight, but I do support the concept of ADUs and moving this forward. I think, Alderman Rusimmons, to your suggestion of building a model, I think we can do that. I think it could be a small model. I don't think it needs to be full scale. It can even be a something that isn't very expensive that we could put on display at the Civic Center to give people an idea of what it is that the pilot would have provided. In my ward, over the past 5 years, there have been 18, at the recent count, ADUs constructed. They are not affordable units, and I would like to work with those folks who did provide them and to see what we can do to make them affordable and make them attractive to homeowners to have affordable units on their property. I think that's something that we haven't investigated, and I'd like to go ahead and make that a priority for our staff and my fellow aldermen to do.
Thank you, Alderman Fisk. I just want to clarify something for the members of council. So the approval dollar amount is actually $220,000, not the 500,000. And then I just wanted to speak to this item, and then followed by Alderman Simmons and Alderman Nguyen. Again, understanding from what I've heard from the residents as well from members of council, I just want to share that we've had, I think, maybe 3 or 4 various meetings with folks from the Second Ward, particularly paying attention to the growing artist row that we have along Florence between Dempster and Greenleaf. And I think throughout those meetings, I've heard some very creative ideas that have come out of it. And when I originally thought of the pilot program, I was thinking of ways to provide some type of incentive, across the wards for people to come forward as a startup fund to get them interested in exploring the various ideas that I've heard expressed around town. So one of the things that I would ask members of council to consider while we're going to hear the next 2 speakers is the possibility of holding this, that will give you time to respond to the comments that we've heard, not only from the residents, but also from the members of council. And we can pick a date and work with Sarah maybe to think about that as well, where you can come back, digest, and come up with a new proposal that would spread the dollars amount around the various wards, and what I would call a real pilot versus just subsidizing one unit. That would be my suggestion to you all. So I'm going to ask for the hold at some point, but we still have 2 speakers, Alderman Simmons, followed by Alderman Nguyen, and followed by Wilson.
When I believe some version of this will happen, but I would like to see them not be above 60% AMI. And then also I would like an update. More than a year ago, I imagine, we approved a budget to support current property owners that are providing rental units that are affordable. And I know there was some discussion about the language and how do we actually launch it. So is there an update from Sarah even on where we're at with that?
I don't have an update tonight.
Sarah, do you mind coming to the mic, please? Thank you.
Apologies. Sarah Flax, Housing and Grants Manager. Alderman Ruth Simmons, I don't have an update right now from the last update that we made in, I think it was in at the end of April. We have some structural problems with that. We had made a recommendation which was not accepted at the time, and I think we have to look at it again. There still remains the CDBG housing rehab program, which all of those people are eligible for. What we've been told in the past is that they wanted a 50-50 cost-sharing thing instead of having a loan, which most of our CDBG loans are 0% interest, and in many cases they are deferred, which is about the best terms I think you can get for a rehab, but we'll continue to work on it.
Okay, so we'll get an update on that.
Pardon?
Do we need to re-look at it, or are we still waiting on an update? Because we approved it, so.
We approved it, but we had explained that the problem with the way it was approved and the direction that council had provided, which was to, it was modeled on the facade program, the storefront modification, but in that program, the property owner pays all of the costs and then gets a rebate. We were instructed to share the costs and split the costs evenly. The challenge with that is, unless you set up an escrow account to make sure that everything is paid by on both sides, we put the city at risk for having costs that it doesn't expect. Doing an escrow account on projects this size is going to drive the costs up, which isn't going to make it any more affordable. And so that kind of left us at a sticking point. We raised that, and we had offered trying to do a very small trial, and that wasn't accepted. One of the things we have also talked about is trying to since the escrow thing doesn't really work, I mean, it really doesn't, what else can we do? But the cost sharing requirement, which was put on by council, if we can remove that and look at other things, well, we can do that. Another question that was raised was, should all of the people who are getting the help also be low and moderate income, which had not been raised before? So perhaps we could get additional direction from council collectively on what you're really looking for in a program, because it's changed a few times.
Thanks, Sarah. I think it would make sense if we put this on for our next quarterly affordable housing update. I know tonight is our quarterly housing update, but I know you're not prepared to speak on this topic thoroughly. So if we could set that for the next update in 90 days, then we can potentially get some of those questions answered that you've just brought up.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry to interject, I know you didn't call me, but for this issue, so you just gave a lot of information in terms of kind of why it wasn't working, and I think I left here under the impression that we were closer to moving forward on that project. So, and before it comes back for an update, would you please send me an email or send the whole council email regarding where we are now, kind of what the barriers are, so we can give some input so that when you come back next time, or maybe even before we're ready to move forward. I mean, I don't think to come back in 3 months and tell me what the barriers are again is not the most productive conversation for me. So I'd like to give you some feedback or speak through some of those before you come back so that we can be moving forward.
Okay, I'd be happy to put together just a short write-up of the barriers for the project as it was discussed and we attempted to do, and then ask for additional direction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Alderman Nguyen, followed by Alderman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I think all my concerns have all been expressed by my colleagues here. I do think that EDC is an excellent idea and will move forward. And I know that as more people in Evanston, you came and spoke at one of my board meetings, become aware of this, it is going to take off. But I do agree with my colleagues' concern about the amount of money and for a single project, and the issue of that was very concisely described by Alderman Ruth Simmons in terms of building equity. So I will not be supporting this project.
Thank you, Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Wilson.
I do think all the points were covered. With regard to the possibility of a hold, I do hesitate on something like that. It's not really a program by EDC. This is a request by a specific homeowner to do something on their property.
Oh, I see.
So, you know, I'm open to other conversations and discussing that, but what I don't want to do is string somebody along and, you know, lead them into thinking we might do something when I think what we're doing is saying that this particular model isn't something we're comfortable with. So I don't want to, you know, kind of drag them along thinking that they might have a chance, and that's really not where we're headed. So.
Okay, thank you for your points. Alderman Fleming.
I think my light was on from the comment I just made, but I do have a question, I guess. So the property owner came, said they were interested. There was a conversation at the Affordable Housing Commission about funding and such. I guess I'm still a little bit stuck on the idea that we would grant city taxpayer funds without a process. So I'm going to again recommend to our interim city manager that we really have to encourage our staff and our commissions to follow a process, particularly when it comes to loaning or giving money. I mean, it has to be very clear that it was open to everybody, what the requirements were. I mean, I'm you know, less concerned about this particular homeowner and more about all the others who were maybe interested but didn't even know there was a pot of money to ask for. So I really would hope that we can work with staff to make sure these things are publicly discussed before they come to council to ask for the funding.
Noted. Thank you, Alderman. So, Dick, I don't know if you wanted to say something, but my recommendation, yeah. Yes, please.
Honorable members of the City Council, City Clerk, City Manager, and audience, I appreciate your comments. You know, when I started and co-founded EDC, I left with two mottos that I really hold dearly. I think today is a good example of that. Is a quote from Maya Angelou: "Do the best you can until you know better. When you know better, do better." I appreciate your thoughtful comments. I see why this proposal is not the right ask. But the other quote that I liked growing up was, "It will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end." My guarantee to you, we will build affordable units. If it's not affordable, it's not the end. We will get there. And the question of how do we get to scale, how do we bring up the construction workforce that is so sorely needed in this town, in this nation, and especially around green construction jobs. I come as a problem solver. I know Alderman Ruth Simmons loves to start her ward meetings by saying, let's bring solutions. So if this is not the solution, we will come back with another solution for your feedback, and we want something that works for all of Evanston, not just first come, first serve, not just this or that. And I appreciate Alderman Fleming's concern on having a public process. So we will be happily and honored to work with city staff and city elected officials to see what is the public process that we can put in place to increase and expand affordable housing options. We've been in operations for about 9 months now. We've been speaking to just about every resident in every single ward, visiting them in their living rooms, from fifth generation Evanstonians to new Evanston residents, really understanding and trying to figure out is the ADU and how the ADU can really provide more housing options for the mother-in-law, for themselves as they downsize. You know, we pride ourselves as a sustainable, age-friendly city. We believe, based on 9 months of boots on the ground, knocking on doors, understanding where our citizens and residents' concerns are, you know, I would double down on coach houses and ADUs. If this is not the right model, we'll come back with another idea for your feedback and for feedback of the residents. And we absolutely believe that this is an option to help every family in Evanston to explore how they can provide more housing options for themselves, for the public benefit. So today I see this as really a great learning opportunity to get your opinion. So I appreciate that. I know your time is precious and there are many urgent items after SP1. So I just want to thank you for your thoughtful comments, and we'll get back to work early tomorrow morning. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Alderman. Oh. All right. So there's a motion. It was seconded for item SP1, the Evanston Development Creative Assessing Dwelling Unit Pilot. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Does it have to be a roll call?
Pardon me. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Just to be clear, there is no motion to table or to... There was.
There was. I didn't make the motion, so there's no motion on the table.
Who did make the motion? I'm sorry, I don't have...
There was no motion. I talked about it, but I didn't do it.
Can we do that again? I don't have a record of who made that motion.
I moved it.
Well, you're the chair. You can't move a motion.
I moved it when I wasn't the chair, but okay, let's do it.
To table to a date certain?
No, just a point of information. Okay, it's just so we're now voting on the motion. As part of the discussion, I said I would like you to consider a hold, but clerk, I didn't make the motion for a hold, so there's no hold on the table. And now we will ask the clerk to take roll call on the SP1.
And the motion was by myself and seconded by Alderman Nguyen.
Yes, Alderman Wilson. Thank you very much. Clerk?
Alderman Nguyen? Alderman Wilson?
No.
Alderman Ruth Simmons?
No.
Alderman Suffredin? Alderman Ravel? Recuse. Yeah. Alderman Fleming? No. Alderman Fisk? And Alderman Braithwaite?
No. The motion doesn't move forward. Alderman Ravel, thank you.
Well, thank you, Alderman Braithwaite, for taking over there. So we have now to hear about the Affordable Housing Work Plan progress update. And Sarah Flax, you want to share some thoughts with us?
Actually, we had put the memo and the chart in the packet without planning to do any major discussion or presentation, but just answer questions, because we know you have an awful lot of other things on the agenda tonight.
Right, okay. Can we have a motion to accept and place on file? And then
I move that we accept and place on file.
Second.
Okay. Alderman Fleming?
I would like some more information about a couple of things on here. The relocation program. I know that there was some preliminary research done on that one, and I guess if you can give me an idea of when you think you might have something to come back. And then also the rental assistance program.
Alderman Fleming, yes. Relocation, we had explained, was going to be rolled into the affordable housing plan with various other services. There are similar things we're looking at in the overall affordable housing plan that are related, not exactly the same, but that include assistance to landlords. There are, in the white paper, we had talked about a range of different services that supported affordable housing, including funds which have been set up in several cities to give landlords who have had difficulty with tenants who, they've had to either evict or something like that, and there have been funds set up to help them when they are dealing with that, and this was all rolled into that, and we had said we weren't going to be coming back before that point. If staff is to come back sooner, then we could obviously get that direction.
Okay, so remind me, when is that coming?
Sometime after the first of the year. We don't have an exact date right now.
First quarter, you think, or?
I would certainly say by in the first half of the year.
Okay.
And the other question, which was the rental assistance, Alderman Rainey, who had originally brought up that idea, had said that should be held until we had a more consistent source of funding for rental assistance. We are continuing our TPRA program based on the amount of home funds we get, but discussion of a larger, broader rental assistance program had been taken off based on those prior discussions until we had a more consistent source of funding. Now, we did, good news, get our $2.4 million funding from the fee in lieu for the 811 Emerson. However, much of that is committed to the development of the 60-unit building down on Howard, which the city committed up to $2 million for. Okay, Alderman Fisk.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's sort of it. Had there been any more discussion with the Housing Authority of Cook County about the, on South Boulevard, there was some discussion about the development of a lot over there?
That there has not been, there were 2 neighborhood meetings that Alderman Wynn had, but we haven't had anything since the second one, which was this spring.
And the concept was how many affordable units on that site?
We never had a specific number of site units in that discussion. We were just discussing broad concepts with the neighborhood.
Are we assuming there's still interest from the Housing Authority to do that?
Yes, they are still interested.
Okay, and any idea of timeline?
They're focused more on the Perlman site right now.
Right, okay.
I can chime in for that one because I actually had a conversation with Rick Minaccio. They are very interested. I think they're kind of waiting on us to move past the neighbors who are not interested and to move forward in developing the property that we own.
Good evening, Johanna Leonard, Community Development Director. I think Alderman Wynn would chime in. We had 2 meetings with neighbors who were concerned. If you recall, when we came to the council to discuss this opportunity this past spring, there were neighbors that were very concerned about how the land would be used, the implications for parking in the neighborhood. That neighborhood has multifamily, CTA use, a lot of different parking needs. And we had 2 meetings. Both were very different types of meetings that really were the point was to try to educate and engage the neighbors in zoning and parking issues and breaking down some of the barriers and assumptions and maybe even a little myth busting. And I think there's still a little bit of work to be done. There were I will give you a flavor of what was discussed. One person said, I don't want the CHA coming into Evanston. That's like, okay. So those kinds of comments, I think we have a little bit more work to do. And our plan had been to reconvene this fall once the summertime, because when we started trying to pick a date, people said, oh, I'm going to be out of town, I'm going to be out of town. And we wanted to try to keep the same group of people who'd been engaged in these 2 meetings to the next meeting.
Alderman Wynn, can you tell us, is there going to be one more meeting? Or I know you had a conversation with your residents in terms of how many meetings there were going to be.
Alderman Fleming, there is no finite number of meetings. Just like I've done in every other development in my ward, it's what the ward needs. And so the neighbors actually some of them were really panicked by what they had been hearing, and there was a lot of misinformation. So we are now working pretty hard to make sure that they get comfortable with this, and we, as Ms. Leonard was saying, do a lot of myth busting because there's been a lot of misinformation about this. So we're going to do as many meetings as it takes to work with people and get them comfortable with this.
Okay. Any more questions or discussion? All right. Well, thank you very much for another update. Do you want to do the presentation now? Oh, sorry. Can we have a vote on, Alderman Fisk?
I just wanted to make one more comment. Could we also, when we're discussing the Civic Center, could we also talk a little bit about whether we could do affordable housing on this site? Even if we stayed in the Civic Center, what opportunities would exist to, pardon me?
Just asking clarification on this site.
Yes, on this site here. I'm very curious about that, whether we stay or not, how we might develop this site to include affordable housing on it.
Yes, we can make that part of the work plan going forward.
Okay, if there are no further questions or discussion, then I'll call for a vote to accept and place on file, and I guess that's just a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? Okay, we'll accept and place on file. Okay, moving on to SP3, which is zoning, regulation, and licensing of cannabis businesses for adult use. And should we start with your presentation?
Start with a motion.
Okay, it says for discussion.
A motion to discuss.
A motion to discuss. Do we do that? Okay. Could I have a motion?
Second.
All right.
All right, I'll open this up. I know our Corporation Counsel is going to give us a presentation tonight on all the various components about adult use cannabis. A lot of issues have been brought up this evening, and we've been talking about this a lot in the community. And I think moving forward, it's probably going to make sense to have a few more community meetings about this topic. So this is just basically opening the door of what the first beginnings of the discussion. Michelle's got a fairly lengthy presentation, and then we also have representatives here from the existing medical cannabis dispensary here who also want to speak just briefly after her presentation. So please go ahead, Michelle.
Sure. Good evening, Michelle Mason, Cup Corporation Counsel. So this is the first couple of slides are just an intro and a summary of the medical cannabis, just to get you familiar with what were the restrictions during that time, and then an overview of the act. So as Erica said, there's a lot to get through, and I tried to summarize a pretty lengthy act for what is most relevant for the city right now, to get your arms around what are the issues that you will have to address in the coming months and into the spring. So this is just an overview of what we'll talk about tonight. It was in your packet. So the Medical Cannabis Act was signed in 2013 and put into effect starting January 1, 2014. So what the Act put into place, we had both cultivation centers and dispensaries. So there were 20 cultivation centers. They were across the state of Illinois, and up to 60 dispensaries. And the city, obviously, because of the way that we are built, we cannot have a cultivation center. The boundaries were such that it was 2,500 square feet, and the distancing requirements are pretty significant. So what we addressed was dispensaries. So the city, so this is the overview of the cultivation centers. They're scattered throughout the state of Illinois. And then the dispensaries, of course, we have one in downtown Evanston. It's in the Maple Avenue Garage. The business is operated by what's called PharmaCann, and these are the distancing requirements that were set out by the statute. So it was basically sensitive uses such as public and private schools, daycare centers, group homes, things like that. So your zoning staff, it's outlined in the next slide. Your zoning staff took our zoning map, laid it out with the restrictions that were set forth in the city, in the state statute, and this is what you were left with. If you added the residential boundaries, things like that, you had very few locations where dispensaries could be located, and one of the available spaces was in the city garage space. So just to remind you, the City Council also instituted a medical cannabis tax. It's taxed at 6% of the sale price. And I can tell you that the PharmaCann lease expires next, so it's like in a year and a half, December 31st, 2021. So the city staff has now just started discussing and negotiating a lease agreement with PharmaCann. But what I can tell you preliminarily tonight, of course this is being negotiated right now, is that PharmaCann would like to move into what is now occupied by Enterprise. So that's the space immediately adjacent to the north. So they would lengthen their space, and then Enterprise would move just a few storefronts south to the vacant city space that's also in the Maple Avenue garage. So we would put forth to the council for review and approval later this fall those 2 new lease agreements. So the new act, what happened? Okay, so end of May, the LNE General Assembly passed an act that pretty significantly changed the landscape for cannabis. So adults over the age of 21 can now possess cannabis. And they set out this regulatory scheme. And so local municipalities, our control has been preempted to a certain extent. What you can control is whether or not to allow cannabis businesses. And if you want to allow cannabis businesses, then you have to consider what are the restrictions that you want to put in place. So that's what we're going to evaluate tonight. And over the next 2 years, it'll be a pretty rapid expansion. It'll go in waves. So the current PharmaCann will be allowed to open a cannabis dispensary starting January 1 so that they can operate both recreational and medical at the same place. It's called the dual establishment or co-locate. And then that business can open up a second business also before January 1 within a certain region. So then following that, the expansion goes pretty quickly, and it goes into waves. So I'll come back to this. So
Michelle, can you just clarify that point that you just made?
Sure.
So I get that by January 1, they can do the dual occupancy.
Yep.
But you mentioned, and I'm looking for the bullet point, that they could open a new business?
Yeah, so they can open 2, so they can co-locate with their existing business.
Got
so
that.
1804 can sell recreational, but they can also open a second business within what's called a Bureau of Labor Statistics area. So it's a geographic region set by the state of Illinois, and it's just whether or not, so the first requirement is, does that municipality where they want to open up a second dispensary allow for cannabis businesses? If the answer is yes, then they apply to the state. So PharmaCann, for example, has 5 businesses right now in the state of Illinois. They are located in, I think it's the previous side, Arlington Heights, Evanston, North Aurora, Ottawa, Romeo.
Yep.
I don't know what the standing is for all of those municipalities, but for purposes of this discussion, let's say they all allow it, then they could have 10 dispensaries total.
Wow.
I think what your question might be getting to is the landscape in Evanston. And right now, PharmaCann is not interested in opening up a second location here in Evanston.
Yep.
They're looking at other properties in other places.
Yes.
Thank you. You nailed
And
it.
I will get to that. So the second wave, so I'll go to the waves.
Excuse me, Michelle.
Yep, sure.
Ms. Bacon, may I ask one other question?
Yep.
Because I think it will clarify things for me. So do the same distance requirements that applied with the medical cannabis now apply? Are there any distance requirements?
There are. So there's only one. The distance requirement is that it has to be 1,500 feet from a different dispensary.
Oh,
so
that's
the
it?
existing dispensary, we will base our regions off of that location.
Okay, so that map then really changes.
But the city can put in additional distancing requirements. So if
Okay.
you want to take out residential zones, or you want to say a certain distance from a school, and the statute is called sensitive uses.
Right.
You can have the Plan Commission consider and bring back for your approval different distancing requirements that the state doesn't establish.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So these are the different types of cannabis businesses. 2 are within the medical cannabis regulation. The others that are marked new are new to recreational, or what is called adult use cannabis. So craft growers are analogous in some ways to a craft brewery. It's just a smaller operation. So the square footage is indicated. It's 5,000 to 14,000 square feet. It's significantly different from a current cultivation center because it can be co-located with an existing dispensary. So they can be growing the product and have a dispensary potentially. A processor is a new type of cannabis business, and an infuser. So these types of businesses will also get licenses following January 1. These are not the type of businesses that can open beginning January 1. Only the dispensaries and cultivation centers. Okay. Do you have another question? Okay.
Could you clarify that? Like the infuser?
Sure.
It can get a license January 1?
So I think I have a slide. This one. Okay. So wave number 1, it breaks out which department handles licenses for those types of businesses. So the Department of Agriculture is important for this type of business. So they are going to be giving licenses to infusers, craft growers, and transporting organizations, and those all start July 2020. And then the second wave is the same thing, and the ramp up is pretty significant. By the end of these waves, the end of 2021, 500 dispensaries will exist in the state of Illinois. But starting January 1, it'll be up to 112 dispensaries in the state, because it's 56 existing dispensaries. Because they can open up a second location, it's 112 dispensaries starting at the beginning of the year.
Do we have to take a local action, or is this?
This starts the discussion.
So, okay.
You have to take a local action in the sense that, so you don't have, if the city says we want to permit these types of businesses, you don't have to take an opt-out. You have to make an opt-out action. But if the city wants to regulate them, that is what we're requesting. We want to know how you want to regulate it. So this is the beginning of the discussion. Okay. So I think I covered this. So this is the existing businesses. They'll start selling the product. So what we will need from the council is what is most helpful right now is zoning. If you want special conditions on the current dispensary or any additional dispensaries that are coming down the pipe, those are the types of questions that we will need tonight, and just some direction for the Plan Commission. So the Plan Commission will be meeting at the end of September, and we'll taking up this issue. So they will be watching this discussion, and any feedback that you'll give them tonight will be helpful for their public hearing at the end of September. Okay. So the statute sets out generally this type of use and sale restrictions. I can't begin to understand what 30 grams of flour or raw or 5 grams of concentrated means, but these are the limitations. We already talked about that. So the other question that Johanna will be getting into a little bit is on-premise consumption. This is very different from medical cannabis. Whether or not you can consume on site. So it's very different. I don't know if PharmaCann has any plans to, but I would like at least for the council to address within the near future if you want to allow on-site consumption, or if you want to allow what are called like smoking cafes, or it's similar to like a hookah bar, but in cannabis. So then with that, Johanna is going to take the next couple slides.
All right, good evening, Johanna Leonard, Community Development Director. A little bit about zoning. So the Plan Commission is the body that starts the process to alter the zoning code. So they're scheduled, the item was noticed, I believe actually for the end of August, but we've continued it twice due to other items at the Plan Commission to next Wednesday, the 25th. So the things that we would do when we do text amendments for zoning codes are location, distance. Often when you have a special use before you, you have things like time of operation, if you want to place any additional restrictions on that, distances, total number, distances, and then the total number of businesses in Evanston. So below there is the notice text amendment. It is a text amendment, so it was not it was in a newspaper of local circulation, 30 days, not more than 30 days, not less than 15 prior to the meeting, and it is not noticed to any property owner because this is a text amendment and not a map amendment. So the primary considerations, as Michelle said, we would be looking for feedback. The Planning Commission will take this up first, then it'll travel to Planning and Development Committee. But any guidance that we can include in a staff memo that informs us, we've done this before on other items when the council has wanted to provide feedback for things going to the Plan Commission. So I think the first question we've kind of touched on, but whether or not to allow or not allow this business. And then we have some draft definitions of medical and cannabis uses, and then determine which zoning districts for recreational dispensaries, craft growers, and Michelle, next cultivation centers, and processing organizations and infusers. So I think most communities are opting out of, if they go forward with this, are opting out of residentially zoned districts. I think medical cannabis had a restriction that you couldn't locate at a residentially zoned district, which is why we got the research park. That is not a residentially zoned district. And then evaluate the permitted or special uses. I think Skokie this evening has before them consideration for text amendments. I haven't checked in to see if what's going on with that, but I believe theirs is just a permitted use with separation requirements, and then Oak Park, I think, has it as well, and they're looking at it as a special use. So other communities are starting to move forward on this. So again, what do we want to, if we want to have any, is it a permitted use or is it a special use? Evanston seems, when they do have these uses, they seem to move in the direction of a special use. That's the giving the ultimate authority to the city council. And then the other issue is on-premise consumption will be permitted, or social use space, smoking establishments, hookah bar, cigar bar. As Michelle indicated, it's not anticipated this is a desire right now, but to just discuss and consider if it is something in the future. And then this table, this has been, we've tried to keep track of what communities are doing, what, talk to our colleagues in different places, visit with various websites of other states that have had legalized cannabis and see what they're doing, but state statutes dole out land use authority to communities a little differently in each state. But here where you can kind of see where the other communities seem to land in terms of trending to allow, trending to prohibit, and still to be considered. I believe Winnetka just passed a red flag ordinance like a month ago.
Alderman Wilson? Oh, okay.
For now. Yeah. It's Michelle's.
Yeah, go.
So in your memo, I think it's on the second page, I outlined with specificity what is the taxing structure that's set out by the state. So it's significant to note that it will be taxed and quite a bit. It's 40% of the purchase price. So our tax is a small portion of the tax. So that if you enact a tax, that we can only tax up to 3% of the gross sales price, gross receipts from sales. And you can do it in quarter increments. So for example, if you put in 2 1/4 and you want to consider doing 2 1/2, that is allowed. But you can't do 2.1 or something like that. So we would like feedback if you would like us to return with a adult use cannabis tax. Yep.
Where would the tax start? If it goes up to 3%, excuse me, where would the tax start?
Well, the floor is 0.25. It doesn't give a minimum, it just gives a maximum.
All right.
And can you, light.
So are we ready? I mean, Alderman Wilson's had a light on for a while.
I had a tax question.
Oh, okay.
Is that okay?
Okay, go ahead, Alderman.
What is the current tax for the medical use?
It's 6%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. That was one point that we would be wanting more discussion on, is whether or not, if we do go forward with enacting a tax on the adult use, would we want to also consider adjusting the medical portion of the tax to be more in alignment with the adult use?
So as you probably understood, we will also bring back city code changes, because now you can possess a much larger amount of cannabis. So these are the city code changes that will need to be made. So we will like to mirror what's in the state statute and put it in our city code so that we can prosecute. We have the flexibility to do administrative adjudication or the circuit court. So you will be seeing those. They'll be coming probably sometime in October.
Alderman Rowe, can I just make a quick comment to
okay.
taxation? Just against the taxation. So I'd be curious to know what we've collected thus far from PharmaCann. I'm assuming all statewide the numbers are way down.
The number, do you know?
Sure, I can speak to that. So the taxation on the medical side is much lower than we anticipate the adult use side to be. So, in talking with the operator, they anticipated perhaps a greater amount of foot traffic or use of the medical dispensary than what was actually realized. So it's not a frequent, it's not a high level operation as it currently in its current iteration. So the taxation is less than $50,000 right now. In anticipating,
is that the revenue or the dollar amount that was
$50,000 in tax revenue to the city currently from the medical operation. But in advance of this discussion, I had asked them if they could potentially expand upon what they're thinking their demand is going to be and how much they might be anticipating in sales next year, so that we could estimate what a tax revenue might be based on a rate that the city council may decide to apply to the adult use. And that number, if we do the 3%, would be about $300,000 a year anticipated, 1% $100,000. So that's kind of the range we're looking at here. We're not going to solve every budget hole that we have with this tax, but it's not insignificant. $300,000 is an additional line item that could help a lot.
Thank you.
And the last major topic is personnel. So the city's current personnel manual has a pretty strict zero tolerance policy, and the changes in the act have significant ramifications for the workplace. And so we would like an opportunity to come back to the council, but this slide just outlines all of the issues that we have to evaluate. So staff recommends at the end of these slides to come back with an analysis on how to okay, step one is pre-employment testing. Step two is what positions within the city should we test?
Right.
Step three is how do you test for impairment if we believe that an employee is impaired? Step four is any discipline from that policy. So it's pretty significant. We'd like to understand what our colleagues are doing. And because this law was put into place in June, we're all still evaluating the issue. We're going to go outside of Illinois and understand how larger cities like Denver or Seattle have approached this problem. So because we need to establish a policy that is reasonable to our employees, but also can be applied uniformly and in a non-discriminatory manner. And so our preference is to come back so that we can give you a more thoughtful analysis. But this is just an overview of all of the issues that we will be taking up and giving you some more information. How to test for impairment, how expensive is it? What are the types of testing? Some of them are using chemical tests, some are using urine, and how expensive is that? And so these are significant issues that the council will have to address. Tonight is not the night, but we wanted to just highlight these for you and get some initial feedback from you as we do our consideration.
Michelle, one of the things that I'd be interested in is if there's any way to collect information from our city employees anonymously, of course.
No. Well, I would guess that city employees who use cannabis might not be willing to take that. So, and to be honest, I want to establish a policy not based on how many people use it, but more in a way that is.
Allow me to clarify my statement. That I'm curious to know how they feel about someone working alongside them. I just think I'm not a smoker. I mean, I could pass this right now, but my point is.
Sure.
I'd be curious, obviously there are going to be positions like police and fire that are first responders, probably not. I don't know if there are any members of our staff that are using it for medical reasons, so I would be curious to get some type of feedback from our staff, whatever that looks like.
I'll talk to our HR director about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you bet.
All right, Alderman Wilson.
Okay.
So that's good.
I have some,
These are just the
Okay.
next step of what we're going to be doing. This is just a roadmap.
great.
So we'll be returning with lease amendments, city code changes, zoning ordinance changes, but this is the first step in that process. As we mentioned, the Plan Commission will take up a discussion at the end of September, and then we will return to the Plan Commission for the other new businesses that we mentioned earlier, craft growers, infusers. So that'll be happening in early 2020. Okay, now we've finished. Alderman.
Great, thank you. And that was very thorough. I appreciate that information. Okay, I have some thoughts and I have a couple questions interspersed. But personally, I would like to see this be special use as opposed to something as of right. With some sort of rational distance parameters, but also distances that don't eliminate the existing facility. So something that is mindful of that. With regard to the taxes, we've got 6% now on the medical, but the state taxes are pretty steep on the dispensaries. Are they the same or similar on the medical, or are they just what are they like on the medical, if you know?
Well, so there are, if I go back to that slide, so if you see in your memo, there are more taxes because there are more businesses. But
right.
I guess I can't really make a comment because I can't remember exactly the taxing structure for medical cannabis.
I couldn't.
I'd have to.
I felt like it's taxed a lot more. This is taxed a lot more than the medical. So yeah. So that being the case, right? That being the case, when I first saw, okay, we can only get 3%, we should lower the medical to 3%. But on the other hand, the tax burden differential is huge. So my personal thought is keep the 6% where it's at and take the maximum on the dispensary. Yeah, I mean, economics-wise, it'll be interesting to see what, rumor has it that there's another existing market for people getting cannabis, here and there. So it'd be interesting to see what that does to that existing marketplace and pricing.
What do you mean by that?
To interrupt, did you want the
Alderman Wilson.
PharmaCann tenant to speak now before they start to deliberate?
Alderman Wilson's been waiting a while to ask his question, so we'll just wait until he gets his answers, and then we'll ask them to come up.
Okay.
Well, they're mostly comments and thoughts. So I guess if they want to go ahead and kind of share what their direction is, I apologize. Yeah, let's do that. I wanted to wait till after the presentation was done. And they can actually probably answer this tax question.
So let me introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Unruh. I'm not on your roll because I didn't speak in the public comment section, so I'll spell my name to make sure it's clear for the record. Unruh, first name Jeremy. I am the Director of Regulatory Affairs for PharmaCann. We're the company that owns and operates the dispensary on the 1800 block of Maple in the parking garage. Not only am I the Director of Regulatory Affairs, but I'm one of the people that left my job to start the company 5 years ago when Illinois passed its medical marijuana law and issued the licenses. And so I remember in our first handful of weeks in operation here on Maple, the state hadn't issued all of our employee credentials, and so our security guards and some of our patient care representatives couldn't work. And so I stood in the little vestibule, the little security vestibule, for the better part of a week and serviced patients as they came in. And that was 5 years ago. And so what I want to say to begin with is thank you very much, because not only were you kind enough to host us here in your community, but you're also our landlord. And to my knowledge, there is no other relationship between a medical marijuana or an adult use cannabis operator and its host municipality anywhere in the United States that I'm aware of. So I want to appreciate that. I thank you for that. And just to clarify a few things, the $300,000 number you got from the tax estimate, so that was actually, let me unpack it. We operate in about 7 different states, mostly in the eastern United States, including Massachusetts, which has also transitioned from from medical to adult use. In our dispensary there in Wareham, Massachusetts, which is kind of far south suburby of Boston, we had a medical dispensary transition into adult use at the beginning of this year. They also are permitted, the municipalities are also permitted to charge a 3% tax on sales, on total sales in that dispensary. Our 6-month remittance was $300,000. So the entire year remittance is estimated to be our 6 months remittance was $300,000. The entire year is estimated to be $600,000. And so that's premised on about a $20 million total sales over the course of a year. So that's the revenue number that I suggest might be applicable in this circumstance. The bill was lengthy. It was 620 pages, and in fact, it is a social equity bill. The Restore, Reinvest, and Renew program is a pool of $20 to $30 million that is available for grants, not cannabis related. There's also a social equity development fund, which is a pool of about $20 to $30 million that is available for social equity applicants coming into the cannabis space. And the waves of these dispensaries is important in that regard. The first, I call them tranche. The first tranche of dispensaries are the 55, 56 existing medical dispensaries in Illinois. They are allowed to also open their doors to adult use consumers. Those 55 are allowed to locate a secondary site, to open up a second storefront somewhere in this metropolitan area. It's the 9-county metropolitan area from Kendall and McHenry on into to Cook and Lake and Will. And so that's intended in the statute to be sort of the backbone of the program. They are the initial operators like myself that will be paying something along the order of, I think, $250,000 per site to the state to seed those social equity and Restore, Renew, and Reinvest funds. The cultivation centers, in order to produce adult use products, will pay a $750,000 per facility fee into those funds. So the initial 55 plus the secondary sites are intended to get this program up and running. The first tranche of new dispensaries, which will be 75, are reserved for social equity applicants. After that, there's the wave of 110 for everybody else. So that's what this program really is. And cannabis, adult use retail sales of cannabis, is used as the vehicle for that. So I'm here, I want to be a resource. I'm obviously a proponent. And so your staff was kind enough to let me come and just, what questions do you have for me? How can I be of assistance to this tribunal in determining how it approaches whether or not it's going to authorize adult use retail sales here in Evanston? I can tell you that our company, PharmaCann, is not interested in on-site consumption, but that's certainly one of the little things, one of the little Easter eggs, I guess, in the statute that is devolved to the municipalities to decide in its sovereignty, so to speak. So what questions can I answer for you?
Did you have an answer to that 6%? So we're doing 6% now.
Yeah.
Is the state taking, what's the state's tax on the medical?
So the tax on medical escapes me, but it's nominal. It's not really intended to be a revenue driver. The revenue driver is this adult use that sets the effective tax rate at roughly 25 to 27% all told. I think I want to say it's 6 or 7 it's a cultivation excise tax, and then there is about a 20% privilege tax. That's the retail sales tax. The municipalities are authorized to charge up to a 3% sales tax, and then unincorporated areas also have a slight taxing ability as well. But the medical is not intended to be a revenue driver, simply because that's medicine in nature.
Right. Okay.
And in addition to the $50,000 in tax revenues that we have generated thus far, we've also made lease payments to the city as well. Just to
appreciate that.
Just to make sure.
Yeah. Cash in hand.
Is that
so? I'll just, I guess, share the rest of my thoughts. There aren't that many, but I know that we tended to adopt, with regard to the smoking ordinances, we were a bit ahead of the state. I know that the state has now adopted additional provisions, so I assume that those are similar to where we're at. But to the extent that they're not, I would want to, keep, smoking should still be in line with the existing smoking ordinances that we have in place for that, and for vaping, which we already have in place. So I would want to make sure that this is wrapped into the same restrictions on that.
So just a quick question on that, on smoking. Do
Yeah.
you mean smoking in buildings, restaurants, things like that, or do you mean smoking lounges like cigar bars? Which
We don't.
I would like this use to match our existing ordinances on smoking and vaping prohibitions.
Okay.
So, so, I think smoking is unhealthy. That's my personal opinion. So I would not want to support smoking lounges. There are other things. I understand that there are other products that can be, ingested otherwise. I don't have as much of a concern about the secondhand, repercussions of those products. So I'm open to, possibly different alternatives for that. But as far as what's put into the air, that's my thought and concern on that.
Well, one thing I should mention for the council is that the regulation says that anywhere where Smoke-Free Illinois Act applies, it's the same for this act. So restaurants, public places, public buildings, it's the same restrictions for this act as well. So I just wanted to quiet any concerns if people were worried about that.
Okay.
But I understand, Alderman Wilson, that you're talking about smoking lounges.
Right, and that's my personal opinion. So.
Right, because we I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And that's all I have.
But
Alderman Lynn, you're
because
next.
we did have a discussion, or it was raised about whether we would permit hookah lounges, and we actually some opened, and then we never permitted them, and I think that's still our position. So, and I think I agree with Alderman Wilson on the vaping issue. At this point, it's not clear at all whether it's safe. And so I think that should be something that we delay and don't come to a decision on.
So I would simply submit to you that with regard to THC vaped products and this spate of illnesses and deaths even that we're seeing, that nearly all of those, if not all, are associated with the production of illicit products. And so the way that we quash that is to regulate those so that they are tested, so that the ingredients are submitted to the state in advance. And so this effort by Evanston is a step in the direction of ameliorating that problem.
Yeah. So I had, since you said that you operate in a number of other states,
yes.
I think one of the critical issues that I did a quick Google search on the place outside Boston in Brookline. No, not but it's not yours. It was
Nita,
right? Which is open till it's 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And it doesn't look like Brookline did a very good job of putting in any type of distance restrictions.
So I am familiar with the notion, particularly in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, when they, what I'll call flip the switch on adult use, they flipped the switch in a state of 6.7 million people with 7 dispensaries. And so it doesn't surprise me that there were problems with people aggregating, particularly in those early days. I can tell you that when we flipped the switch in Wareham, we leased a parking lot down the street, and we shuttled people to our dispensary so that we wouldn't disturb our neighbors. And one of the things that my company will do, and it's probably something that can be in your guidelines as well, is before we flip the switch, if we are permitted to do that, we'll come to the city with a plan for how we're going to address the first handful of weeks or months or whatever that period of time we might be to make sure that we address these concerns. Because I hope we have been a good neighbor these 5 years, yes. And I have every intention of continuing that relationship.
Right, and I think you're just reading the article that I just read, which was I think within the last month or so, they're still having people line up, and you're right, there are too few dispensaries open, but obviously the first few months that this is open, no matter how many we have open in Illinois, is going to attract a lot of traffic.
I think so too.
So I think one of the issues we should send as a question to our zoning board is what are the hours that of operation for a dispensary, because that's going to be critical.
The statute, I want to say it's 9 in the morning to.
It's 6 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Yes, and our plan is to, and I'm aware that the municipality can further limit that, or I suspect that the municipality can further limit that. I think just if you want my own feedback, our sense is to be open kind of the way we are now, which is roughly 11 o'clock in the morning to about 7 o'clock at night, roughly, just in that sort of neighborhood. And that also, a lot of that is driven by patient demand.
Right.
We started with 2 or 3 days a week open, and then those afternoons we were open, and then we sort of incrementalized into those hours that we're at now.
And in some of the other states you operate in, you can see what our map does with the.
Yes.
Was it the 1,000? Did we have 1,000? Is it a 1,000-foot restriction?
That was yes, it was based on the state medical
right.
cannabis.
So I think in order to have, I don't think it should be in residential areas. I think we should probably recommend the zoning board look at a smaller distance, just so that we have a few more options available, as opposed to like the center of Calvary Cemetery. So I think that what are some of the distance requirements that you're seeing that seem to work well with communities in other states?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think that people are attempt to be respectful of residential areas. I can tell you that the city of Chicago is kind of batting around the distance 500 to 1,000 feet. And I don't know where in that spectrum they will end up. I know that a lot of municipalities kind of come to it. They use what do we do for tobacco? What do we do for liquor as a guideline to sort of maneuver from. So, I mean, I don't want to answer that for you, but those are the considerations that we see. I can tell you that 5 years ago, I want to say that there were only 2 commercial retail locations available to us. One was, I think, on Central, and then the other one was the one that we're in now, and that was it. So, I think you folks need to kind of figure out how you want to come to this in terms of a social equity piece, a revenue piece, and a harm reduction piece, and then lay your zoning out accordingly. Yeah. Okay. Especially given the fact that you're right on the border of Chicago.
Yeah, good point. Okay. That's all I have.
All right. Any other comments or questions from folks? Alderman Fleming.
Thank you, Mike. I have no questions for you, but thank you for coming.
Yeah.
So I guess my concerns are more around our personnel and our police and sorry, I'm trying to find the slide here. Our sorry, I just had it. Well, anyway, our police arrest and expungement. So the expungements will be done automatically through the state, correct? And then we will adjust our arrest policies after that. In terms of our personnel, I do think we need to, look at these things listed. I think and again, I'm not a smoker either, but to say that we're going to proceed with a zero tolerance, I think is a little heavy-handed. And I will say that, outside of people who are operating heavy machinery and, those kind of things, I think we have a medical cannabis. If we move forward with a recreational cannabis here, particularly we are the tenant, we are the landlords, as he's mentioned. I guess I just feel like in the city that, wants to be very progressive, to tell our 311 operator that they cannot participate in in something that is now no longer illegal in the state, right? We wouldn't tell someone they can't go home and drink beer, which is also legal, and we know you can be impaired and such with alcohol as well. So obviously we want our employees to not come to work impaired, but I think I would really caution us, and I'm sure you're going to do this, to be very clear about what that means if someone, we do drug testing and someone is positive for something, that we're very clear about that. I have concerns if it is legal. We potentially are looking to profit with sales tax as a landlord, and then we're telling staff who are not in a position where they can't do their job if they have had marijuana the night before that they can't work here or that they will be terminated. So I think if we're going to, and I know you're coming back in the next couple months with that, but if we're going to look at zero tolerance, I would really look at that for maybe the first month or so that the law is enacted until we figure it out. I just have lots of, particularly as you mentioned, being close to Chicago, we have people who come from Chicago, they have, I think with the social equity piece, it's really important that we make sure that we are not going to further penalize people, I guess is what I'm trying to say here with that. So I think our personnel policy should reflect that we also understand this is legal, we support, and we are not prying into what people are doing in their personal lives, and that we're trusting them to be productive and responsible and staff when they're here.
Any other comments or questions? Then I think, are we ready to entertain the resolution?
Let me just excuse
sure.
myself. Thank you for your
Okay.
time. And if I can be a resource to you, including showing you around our dispensary, showing you what's there, the security, the consumer protections, please don't hesitate to let me know. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Before we move on, I just wanted to summarize sort of the conversation that's being had so that we make sure that we're all on the same page as we move forward with this. As we move forward, we're making all the best efforts to put all the regulations in place so that the existing operator can operate as of January 1. So that will be our number one goal, so to speak, going forward. But I don't know if I've got an idea that we can pass forward to the Plan Commission regarding whether or not there's a consensus to allow craft growers or infusers in that future wave. So if you just want to have a brief discussion about that, that would be great.
So based on the size of the operations, and my inclination is to allow for, the infusions and the processing. That could be done in industrial areas, and just kind of start there. And then, there's obviously the provision for somebody to grow a small amount in their home, but defer on the craft growing and the larger scale, kind of agricultural operations. I mean, I understand that those kinds of things could be done indoors, but I don't know that there's likely to be a particular market for that or even the space for that, especially when you take into account the spacing restrictions. But so my thought is allow for those infusing and processing, the more industrial type operations.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Alderman Ravel, one thing that might be helpful is, does the council want us to pursue a cap on the number of dispensaries initially? That might help staff with buffers. So I would imagine what we did for other projects is that your zoning staff basically takes the map and just expands it and contracts it based on 500 square feet, 750 square feet, and how many land areas does that involve? But if we can also understand, if you want us to not include daycares and just have schools, because what we found is daycares are everywhere in Evanston, and home daycares specifically, that limited the number and areas where they could be located. So that type of guidance would be helpful. So if you think you just want us to exclude schools and I don't know anything else, these are called sensitive uses under the statute, so the local municipality can restrict those further. This is medical, and so when we took out the daycares, the home daycares, the schools, the private schools, this is what you were left with, and residential areas. It's Northwestern's campus.
Alderman Nguyen pointed out the cemetery that. I think maybe just kind of eyeballing this, it looks like there's kind of really only 3 areas, so maybe putting a number of 3 on it. I mean, it seems arbitrary, but it seems like there's only, 3 that kind of, would be appropriately spaced.
Sorry, and the council can reevaluate it in a couple of years if you think you can deal with more demand. But that type of guidance, maybe we can start with a number and see where it goes from there, if you'd like us to put a cap on it.
Yeah, so did NU see this chart? I'm just kidding.
So I'm fine with the 3 as well. I will just say, being that I represent part of the large orange area in the southwest corner there, although that is, that's Rosinga and Home Depot and all that stuff there are also some houses over there. And those residents Alderman Braithwaite, I won't speak for your residents, but I know my residents there is where the large water standpipe is and some other, businesses that sometimes we, have other traffic that the residents don't love already over there in terms of large trucks and lots of trash and lots of late night parking and so on and so forth. So, I guess I would like us to expand maybe taking out the home daycares and see if that opens up some more. I would be hesitant to go to my ward meeting tomorrow with this map and then say, this is where we can have a dispensary, understanding that they already have concerns about having cars that are crushed at North Shore Towing and cement that is mixed-dosing.
What I'm hearing is that we should put it, recommend special use instead of a permitted use in certain districts so that the neighbors.
So special use, for sure.
And then that addresses the issue for us.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So are those all the issues that the resolution touches on? It's the, shall we affirmatively say, yes, we would like to permit cannabis businesses? We don't need to be more, and we're going to say dispensaries of recreational marijuana, infusers, and what was the third one? Craft. Production.
My only recommendation based on this discussion is that there would be an amendment to that first section where essentially the council would say, please move forward with allowing these businesses to locate in Evanston with these conditions.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because the first one poses it as a, or.
Okay. And, all right, so would someone like to make a motion
There's
to?
a light on behind you.
I'm sorry. Okay, Alderman Simmons.
Is this coming with the recommendation of, are we moving forward with the action if this is passed? Or what's happening right now? Because I have a lot more questions.
Sure. So you're going to have a lot of trailer legislation to this discussion. So we're going to have a lot of ordinances that will come subsequent to this meeting. The only thing that we would need is just the resolutions on page 22 of your packet. So that just gives direction to the Plan Commission for what to evaluate.
Okay.
Yeah, so the only thing we would need from you tonight, so that what I had just mentioned is section 2, subsection A says whether all or some cannabis businesses should be prohibited in the city. So if the council wants to amend that at all, please let us know. Otherwise, we will proceed with how it's drafted.
Okay. Because my thoughts without any research yet are limiting this type of business to the downtown area. But I'm just not informed enough for us to be making any kind of final action.
Yeah. Okay. After the Plan Commission discussion, we will come back.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll make a motion along the lines of what our council suggested, and hopefully I get this right-ish. So I move that we amend Section 2, subsection A to read, striking the language whether all or, and replacing that with specifying which, such that it reads, specifying which cannabis businesses should be prohibited in the city. No, that's not right. Specifying which cannabis businesses will be allowed.
Will be allowed with what
in the
conditions?
city.
Yeah. Great.
Second.
Are there any other amendments? Oh.
So vote on that amendment.
Oh, if
there's any
to vote to approve that.
Okay, all right. All in favor of the motion to amend as stated by Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any opposed? Okay, we've got one amendment.
Okay.
Are there any other?
I move that we adopt Resolution 88R19 as amended.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so Alderman Nguyen just pointed out subsection C. I'll make a motion that we amend subsection C to state that
Section 2, subsection C.
Section 2, section C. Revise that to state cannabis businesses shall be classified as special uses.
Second.
All right, all in favor of the motion as stated by Alderman Wilson, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, another amendment.
Thanks for that. So I'll move that we adopt 88R19 as amended.
Second.
Okay, then all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. All right, so we have some direction to the Plan Commission, and we will be having lots more discussion.
Can staff just tell me again when the Plan Commission is meeting? There was a date up there that I don't see in my
So
packet.
25th.
It's on September 25th.
I'm sorry.
September 25th.
September 25th. Okay, thank
I
you.
believe it's at 7. Yeah, it's in the council
Okay.
chambers.
Now, so, all right, we are ready for SP5, a discussion about moving forward with the space planning study for City Hall functions in lieu of moving forward with the planning and design of the Civic Center HVAC, electrical, and security improvements project. So do we have some...
Go ahead and read it, just so we know what we're talking about.
What was that?
Go ahead and read it.
I read the whole thing? Okay. Staff also recommends moving forward with a site identification study to determine potential options for new space. This study would need to lag the space planning study by several months in order to incorporate findings from the space planning. Staff also seeks direction from City Council on whether a space planning study should be limited to only City Hall functions, or if it makes sense to look at other buildings and functions where city buildings are in need of significant capital investment. Additionally, staff recommends evaluating options for the repurposing of the current facility. This is a complicated sentence grammatically. Basically, that we conduct that discussion separately from the process of moving forward on a new civic center. Staff will return at a future meeting to discuss the options available for City Council regarding the existing facility. So this is for discussion. And do we have a presentation, or do we want to jump right into discussion?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. We do not have a presentation for this evening. As you recall, we did a presentation in August regarding the findings from the HVAC study that was conducted. The city engineer gave some initial projections regarding the significant capital investment that's going to be required if we are going to stay in this building for the long term. So there seemed to be some consensus at that meeting that perhaps we should look at other options. So there's a lot of feelings around this issue, and it's definitely been debated for many, many years. But to bring it back now and to have the discussion and move forward, there's a lot of things that we would have to do, and this would be a very long discussion. We wouldn't be moving out of this building anytime in the near future. Certainly, community involvement would take place, and there would be different committees that would be formed, and we could, have that process move along with the general speed that we undertake when we do massive projects such as this. But it's the appropriate time to have this discussion because of the concerns that we have about this existing facility. I sometimes joke with staff about, I want to make sure that if anything happened to this building in the wintertime and we couldn't heat it, are there enough, collaborative workspaces in the vicinity that we could house city staff at in the event that that would happen. And that's, we do the best we can with the limited funds that we have to keep this building up and running. But we understand, too, that there has not been any significant capital investment in the mechanicals of this building in over 20 years. So we move forward knowing what we know, but knowing that something could happen, and it would be a very big challenge for us to continue operations in this building. So with that, want to hear the discussion regarding whether or not we should move forward with a space planning study. The way that the technology has evolved and how it's affected how we run city operations, it does make sense to move forward with a space planning study, even though one was conducted 10 or 12, 15 years ago. We have inspectors on mobile iPads who rarely, if ever, need to check in at City Hall. So that's just a different way of operating than when we had people coming in and sitting at desks and having to answer landline telephones. So there is some value to add to having a new space planning study be conducted. And that would just be step one of 100 as we would move forward. So really at this time, we're just seeking that direction to move forward on a space planning study if that's what the council decides. I'm happy to move forward now in the discussion.
Alderman Wilson, I think your light was first.
Thanks. And despite the angst and anxiety this discussion just automatically creates in the community, I think it's important to have it. Just similar to when we were considering the Crown project over a very extended period of time, you have to really thoughtfully approach a situation where you're going to be making a very major infrastructure investment into an existing facility and make sure that makes sense. So I have a little bit of a question, but Ms. Doyley, your point is well taken. I think at a minimum, we should be doing some kind of, whatever you want to call it, space planning, space usage, even if we were not to move. And personally, just so everybody knows, I'm not inclined to move out of the building. I think we should keep the building. That's an opinion that I have, but just so nobody chooses to twist what I said. But there might be other opportunities for alternative uses in the building, and I don't mean to foreshadow that it should be for the dispensaries. Okay, I'm not saying that, but we have tenants already, so people are using the building for a number of different purposes, and if we have opportunities to open that up further, Alderman Fisk talked about the possibility of housing, maybe not, even if it's not in the building, maybe on the what I'll call the campus area. There could be opportunities that we're not thinking of at this point, so I'm interested in that. A question I have, if we were to invest, and Ms. Biggs is here, thank you for staying. I already know the answer probably, and the answer is probably, I don't really know for sure, but if we were to make, it seems to me the most critical thing is the HVAC system, based on the kickball that's used to plug the hole in the basement somewhere. So if that work were to be undertaken, would that still be of value if the building was repurposed? So in other words, are we throwing the money away if the building's being repurposed for something later because it would have to be completely redone, or is there value being added to the structure as a whole if we do that work?
Members
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, my name is Laura Biggs. I'm the city engineer. So if we were to invest and replace the HVAC system and the electrical, it is definitely a likelihood that that would be valuable to the next use of the building. I think that work is going to need to be done at some point, regardless of if we are having a city hall here or if we are not having a city hall. However, there are some reuse purposes of the building that I would imagine involve doing a more significant gut rehab of some of the floors, in which case it would not be as useful as waiting until you have the final wall locations and everything in place. So it really just depends on what a subsequent use to us doing the HVAC project are.
Okay. And so I think as far as the space and planning, analysis, that's useful because that could guide some of how the work is ultimately done. Even if we stay here, if we choose to, carve out a portion of the building for some other purpose or tenants or whatever that is, to make sure that we're doing that in a way that doesn't, throw good money after, in other words, wasting it. So there was that.
We'd also spoken in the memo about talking about other facilities. So as you know, it's not just this facility that has significant capital requirements. Police and fire headquarters, some other facilities also have significant financial needs, and those perhaps should also be evaluated if we are looking at long-term solution to a long-term problem. It's possible that a combination of city functions and a consolidated facility would ease our financial burden over the long term by putting more functions in one facility. So instead of maintaining a separate building for a civic center and a separate building for police and fire, both of which would need massive capital investment, perhaps it makes sense to look at if those functions could be consolidated in one facility, and then we would remove those long-term both remediation efforts and also long-term maintenance costs from the financial burden that we would have to undertake for them. So that's also something we'd like to discuss this evening, if those are things that we should also look at, or if we should just look specifically at City Hall functions as they currently exist today.
Okay. Well, that's sort of my broad overview perspective on it. So thank you.
Alderman Nguyen and then Alderman Fisk.
I was someone on the council who did vote to leave this building 15 years ago, or whatever the number was, and I have read the Doyle report and the other space needs report. I think it was U.S. Equities that did it, and it was actually a unanimous vote of the council. I think all 3 times we voted. So, and we were facing, I think it was $1 million repair on the roof. That prompted, well, there was a lot of discussion about it. So I do think, as Ms. Storley said, that work has changed so dramatically in that relative sort of, we think of it as a relatively short period of time, but work has really changed dramatically. And so I think no matter what, we should have a space study done. I don't think it should take as long as the prior one did, so we can understand what we're doing in the building. If we were to stay, how would you arrange it? I do think we should also, for the sort of long-term financial planning, we should look at potentially having a true civic municipal center, because we do have these other older buildings, and that would make sense so that we aren't maintaining more buildings than we need. And I would like to understand the space and understand what our potential choices are. Because this is an older building, and this is just the beginning of a lot of maintenance. And I like it a lot too. When initially we discussed this, I couldn't imagine moving out, but I do see these large ticket items just marching down the road at us. And is that really the best use of our city dollars, or is there a better option for us over the long term? I mean, this building wasn't designed as a civic center, and we've kind of made it work, but we have an enormous amount of unused space in the building, and so what does that do, or the kind of space design that we have, does it promote the most effective work? I think that's another aspect that we should think about. So I'm in favor definitely of doing a space study and looking at potentially consolidating. And that doesn't mean this decision is going to happen anytime soon. And clearly, we stayed here for another 12, 14 years, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. So, but I do think, as a fiduciary of the city, we should be looking at these things in a really thorough, comprehensive way. So.
Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I agree with the space planning study, and appreciate the fact that the way we use the building has changed. The way our staff uses the building has changed. But I'm very sensitive to the fact that the building is landmarked. It's beautiful. We've put in millions of dollars into the building. The roof is gorgeous. And the space planning study is going to give us a good idea of how much space not only do we need, but is there the ability to carve out the space within the building? Does that make sense? And if that makes sense, then what do we use the rest of the building for? So I'd like to fold into the conversation, maybe a conversation with our community development department, and space planners for what would be alternative uses for the building. I don't want the building torn down regardless. I mean, if we decide, fine, we should move to something smaller and something that makes much more sense for us, over the long term, then what happens inside this building? And I think there are options, not only to keep the building, but to enhance the building and make the building even better than it is now. But I certainly don't want the building taken down. So I don't know how we do that. Johanna, I don't know whether we have, between you and Laura, if there's staff to look at that component of it, but I would suggest that we engage someone in the real estate community too, to inform us what would the market's evaluation of this building be? Is there any way to, repurpose this building for, as I mentioned at the earlier conversation, for affordable housing or for affordable workspace or affordable something? I can see a townhouse development on site. I can see a lot of different things. And that's not to say that I endorse any of them, but it's just, if we're going to have the conversation, it should be a far-reaching conversation. And I think that would be very interesting to the community. It certainly would help us up here make our decision. But as I remember, it was up to $20 million that the staff's estimate was to do the repairs and some upgrades to the building. $20 million. I mean, if we can figure out a way to use only part of the building, rent out the rest of the building, do something else creative, that would be one alternative. Selling the building would be another alternative. Where would we go? We'd look at staff for trying to figure out how much space do we need and where that space is. I can think of a couple of spots that might provide that. The other part is it's a long hike to get around this building. I mean, I think we probably have the best, the most athletically fit staff in the world, from marching around and up and down the stairs and through the building. But that's not very efficient. I mean, we aren't working efficiently, and how can we work a little bit more efficiently? So all of these things are just kind of to put it together and ask you guys to make some sense out of what we're talking with the larger picture of what do we need, where would we go or stay, how could we maximize our not only investment in the building, but who might be interested in it, and that's a big job, but fun.
Right. Alderman Ruth Simmons? I'm sorry, Suffredin. I misread my rights.
So I just want to make sure I understand. It seems like the threshold question is how much space do we need for the functions of government? I mean, the first question should really have nothing to do with this building. It's how much space do we need? Does everyone need to be in the same spot? Can we have like our public-facing employees in one place and non-public-facing employees in another place? Do we need to have our meeting space, our council chambers in the same building where we have people who work during the day? It sounds like police and fire need to be taken into account. Is it best to have that all be one building? I know, Skokie has their municipal building adjacent to their library. I know that'll be an emotional discussion in this town. But it sounds like we're kind of farther away from what the use of this building is. First, we need to figure out how much space we need for what we need to do. I don't know I'm sure there are other communities that have a combined police, fire, city hall. Should we confine this discussion to the government part, figure out what our head count is, figure out how we do business relative to how we did when those other studies were done? A lot of transactions don't need to be done face-to-face. Some transactions that we do face-to-face, maybe we shouldn't do face-to-face. Should we, rather than focusing on what the ultimate use of this building is, like Mr. Kennedy was talking about how much community input that would require, and I think that's appropriate, isn't the first, most neutral study just how much space we need for the amount of employees that we have? And that's not really you, Laura, right? I don't know who would be you're in charge of the building.
I mean, sort of. I'm just in charge of all of the construction and capital and engineering projects. So we would hire a consultant to do that. I don't think that we have the time available in staff, and maybe not the right expertise, but we do employ in the Bureau of Capital Planning a couple of architects, and working with community development to help develop the scope of work, we would issue an RFP for that work to be done. The space planning study that was last done was done in 2006, and that was pre-recession, before we removed something like 50 head count. When I looked back at it, that space planning included things like a dental clinic and health clinic areas. My own department in Public Works had 27 people listed in that space planning study. We have 14 people here now. So the way the staff is organized and the functions that we perform as the City Hall have actually changed quite a bit. I mean, we've incorporated in the township. We have changed what the city clerk's office does multiple times. We have redone a lot of things. Emergency management's no longer done out of the city manager's office. It's done out of fire. So it definitely makes sense to me, to what you're saying, is to find out what do we really need, because I'm fairly certain, just even using some logic, that we rent out about 1/5 of the building, that we're at least 20% under the needs of this building in terms of space. But we may very well be even less than that, because this building is just not efficiently laid out as an office building. It's laid out as a school.
Alderman Braithwaite.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to go back to something Alderman Fisk said, and I realize that when you bring it back, it's probably going to be some time, but I would just share with members of council that we should keep all options open, which would include selling the building and also what it would cost just to take it down. I think if a developer is going to come in to repurpose it, it would probably be a big ask. I mean, we have a $360+ million budget, and we can't afford the $20 million to renovate it. It just doesn't make economic sense that someone would buy this building for the purpose of, with the understanding that they would have to invest so much money and then turn around and do some type of affordable process. So if you're going to do it when it comes back, just include also knocking it down. I mean, we'll probably be a totally different council by the time we have to make any decision for it. So let's just make sure that all the options are on the table, Laura. Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Fleming.
Yeah, so the space planning makes sense to me. I am a little hesitant to have a consultant. I mean, I'm not a space planner, but it seems to me we could ask each department how many people they have and how much space they need and who works from home. And I mean, though that's not getting to the engineering, architectural part, but it gives us an idea of head count and square footage and, you know, who's here and who's not here. I would hope we could do that in-house, just as we talk about all these other plans that I've been here for and consultants that we've hired, and then we put the plan on the shelf. I would like to, and I think the mayor, not the mayor, but we just approved something for some kind of assessment of city property, but was that just the value of the property, right, not the usage of the property?
There was an RFP approved last week at the council meeting for city-owned properties, highest and best use. So just evaluating the overall portfolio of city assets and looking at whether or not it makes sense to use them as they currently are used, or if there's other higher and better uses for them. So that is still in the stages of not yet being released, but it was approved to be released.
Okay, so some information we're looking for might somewhat or another be in there. I like Alderman Sufferton, would be interested in seeing how we can consolidate some other city functions either into this space or into one other larger space, if that makes sense. I mean, we all know we have lots of buildings that are needing lots of work, and so if we're going to take on repurposing this one or whatever with this space, we have lots of green space out here that I love the idea of affordable housing, but maybe that's where we put the new fire station or something. I think if we're going to go after this, it makes sense to kind of go big. If we're going to have the community involved, whether they like our plan or not like our plan. My other question for this space, and I know we've talked a lot about the amount of money it needs to be up to date, is still the safety thing weighs heavy on me. So aside from HVAC, I know that we have to update the electrical and all those kind of things really to make this building totally safe for our staff. And we might not want to discuss that, but it is something that I think need to be thinking about if we remain in this building, how we can really make it the most safe building for our staff and people who are in the building as well. And then my other, I guess, suggestion here is when we look at the service center. So I know when we sold the recycling center, there was a whole idea about how many cars we have parked there and then where those trucks and things are going to go and what's over here. So I would be interested also to, if we think about incorporating everything, I mean, I think we left that we were going to rent a storage space. Is that correct, for those trucks to go somewhere that are currently now at the recycling center? Is that also correct? Do we remember that?
Yeah, we had evaluated some options. We haven't moved forward with any of them yet, but those are things that we're considering in addition to looking at spaces that we could potentially purchase. Or part of the RFP that was issued last week would be looking at that as well, as if there's any existing facilities that might accommodate that.
Okay. So yeah, I guess I'm moving just more towards the bigger picture. I mean, this is part of a bigger piece for me, and so it would be hard to just say, stay or go when I know maybe a few years down the line we have another building that we need to look at. At some point or another, there was some conversation I was in about the library downtown and maybe putting some city council or city government space over there, which would be ideal because it's downtown Evanston, but libraries are sticky things, as Alderman Sufferton pointed out. So I would really like us to have this conversation in a more thorough way. and not just thinking of this building, but how can we move forward with all of our buildings and make the best choice for future use of all the city's staff and operations.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate all the comments my colleagues have made. I guess the one aspect of this space evaluation that I would suggest is how can we make, if we're looking at this building in particular, it's not just a matter of how much square footage do we need and how much could we carve out for some other entity, but how can we make our space more inviting to the public? So right now, we have a pretty fortress-like feel to the upper floors with our big closed doors and no way for when people come here to feel like there's somebody greeting them and helping them figure out where they're going. So there's that aspect that troubles me about our current space. Is that all right? Anything?
I have one quick question. Do we have an idea of what the cost would be for this study, for the space planning? I think it's part 1.
I don't have a cost off the top of my head, but I do anticipate it is substantially less than $250,000 that we had budgeted for HVAC to begin the HVAC and electrical planning and design. So I am thinking that it is more in the range of $50,000, but honestly, I have to work with community development and see what maybe other communities have done to get the true price range.
I think we've got enough information from this discussion to come back to the council probably within the next month or two with potentially an RFP. And so thank you.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. All right, then I think we're ready for call of the wards. And just, I guess, Alderman Nguyen, are you?
No report.
No report.
Yeah, Alderman Wilson, Alderman Rusimmons.
Yes, I just want to welcome back 105 Evanston residents that took an uncomfortable journey. Thank you for your commitment to our community. And I'm hoping that you got what you needed on the trip. Thank you. To Nina Caven and to Dear Evanston and everyone else involved in the planning and execution of that trip. And happy Hispanic Heritage Month. Thank you.
Alderman Suffredin.
I'd just like to acknowledge the passing of Kathy Miller, 6th Ward resident, who was most recently here in opposition to the 2626 Reese proposal and was really the quarterback of that group, and was just a really dynamic, great person, and will be missed.
Wow. Yeah, sorry to hear that. Alderman Fleming.
Yes, I will be having an award meeting on Wednesday, this Wednesday, the 18th, at 7 p.m. at the Levy Center. We will be talking about the budget. Also wanted to remind everyone that we have 3 budget community meetings coming up. The first one is tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the JEH Education Center over McDaniel. The second is on Thursday of this week from 1 to 3 at the Main Street Library, or the main library. No, sorry. Yeah, the main library in Orrington. And then the last one is Saturday the 21st at noon at the Levy Center. So please participate in one or all of the meetings so that as we get going in the budget, you have some questions answered and you are ready to participate. Thank you.
Alderman Fisk. Alderman Braithwaite.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So first thing, thank you, Alderman Simmons. Also want to welcome back all the people that took the trip. I was on site with the mayor Friday to see everyone off, and looking forward to hearing some of the personal stories. And then as a reminder, this Wednesday is the mashup. So I know we canceled one of our meetings as a result. So looking forward to seeing many of you there Wednesday evening. Thank you.
Okay. And then Alderman Wilson,
All right,
you will lead us into executive
Thank
session.
you. Pursuant to 5 Illinois compiled statutes, LCS 120/2A, I move that the City Council convene into executive session to discuss an agenda item regarding personnel. This agenda item is a permitted subject to be considered in executive session and is an enumerated exception under the Open Meetings Act. The exception is 5 LCS 120/2AC1.
Thank you.
Alderman Nguyen.
Oh, good. Okay, go ahead.
Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Alderman Ruth Simmons.
Aye.
Alderman Suffredin. Alderman Ravel.
Aye.
Alderman Fleming. Alderman Fisk. And Alderman Braithwaite.
And do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion. Move into executive session.